So in terms of this conference, this is the conference of the African Labor Law Society. And our vision is to see a community of African labor lawyers and labor lawyers who are friends of Africa that is visible, engaged, and recognized on the continent and globally. And what is it that we are trying to do? We are out here trying to facilitate conversations about labor law and social protection and to promote networking amongst practitioners and scholars on the continent. We also aim to amplify African voices on global debates on labor and social protection law. And we promote and support research and the publication of materials of African labor and social protection law. And we also aim to promote and support the establishment of national labor law societies on the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, this is the second conference of the African Labor Law Society that is happening outside South Africa. And I'd like you to just give us a hand of applause for that, and I'll tell you why. It's significant, colleagues, because for those of you who have followed the history of this society, South Africa was pretty much our mother in a way. The South African Labor Law Society, the South African Society for Labor Law, SASLAW, was very instrumental in the establishment of the society and provided administrative, financial, logistical support towards establishing this society. And the first conferences that were held were pretty much tied to the SASLAW conference. And we thought that that would help us to build momentum. As you know, South Africa has a very high concentration, probably the largest body of labor lawyers who are very organized on the continent. And so we drank our milk from that, our mother. And I remember when our former president, Professor Stefan van Eck, said, it's time we moved outside of South Africa and we took this society conference elsewhere. I was really afraid because I wasn't sure whether we'd have that kind of traction, have that kind of momentum, because we were very much bolstered by South Africa. But as you can see with the faces here and the delegates list, if one is to look at the countries where people are coming from, we can see that there is value within this society across the continent because people have really made an effort to be here. And we have a very high number of delegates who have paid their own way or who have had organizations pay their way, which shows that there is value in this and that we're building a truly African community. So this is really exciting and we're really grateful to those of you who came here physically. Mauritius is not a cheap destination, beautiful as it is. So we're really, really grateful for that. And I would also just like to end on a note of, thanking you and applauding you for being here. We know, and even those who are online, we know that your time is valuable. You could be doing many other things. So we do not take your effort to be here for granted. And we invite you and we encourage you to fully participate and engage in stimulating discussion and debate, because this is about conversations about our continent. And it's a very important place for us to be doing this. And I challenge you also, colleagues, many of us have been here or are in these circles and we have our familiar friends, our familiar colleagues. But I challenge you also to step out of your comfort zone and strike up a conversation with a colleague whom you've never met, and who knows what could happen, who knows what could come out of that. This is where relationships and networking is happening. And I implore you also to, while you're at this conference over the next 2 days, keep some questions at the back of your mind and to find a way to share your views with us, whether it's one of the management committee or with Claire. I think we might set up something of an online poll, but think about this in terms of what are the areas in which we can improve in terms of this conference, and also how can we grow and strengthen this society, because this is our society and we need to build it together. And very, very lastly, I strongly urge and advise you to take every opportunity to enjoy this breathtaking island. I thank you very much. Those are my remarks in welcoming you. So colleagues, to move very swiftly with our program, the official opening was going to be done by the Honorable Minister of Labor. I'm going to ask our country representative from Mauritius. So this is Africa, and not everything goes according to plan. In fact, anywhere in the world. The representative of the minister is not yet in the building. And so we are going to call upon our speaker from the ILO to give us an address as we anticipate the arrival of the representative of the Ministry of Labor. So I'm going to call upon Dr. Coffi Agossou, who is the International Labour Organization Country Office Director in Madagascar. And it covers Madagascar, the Comoros, Mauritius, and Seychelles. Prior to this position, he was senior labor statistics specialist at the ILO Pretoria office, and he was a member of the Decent Work team for Eastern and Southern Africa, which is at the Pretoria office. In his capacity, he provides technical support to 18 countries and the SADC Secretariat in labor statistics and labor market information systems. Prior to joining the ILO, he was the UNDP Regional Center in Dakar, and he was working as the youth employment expert for the regional program for social connection and youth employment. Before the UNDP, he worked in Canada for 12 years, and he has a record of doing different work in that country, primarily working in the labor statistics field. He holds a doctorate in social sciences, and he graduated in Canada. He holds a master's degree in urban development, and he graduated in Morocco, a master's degree in mathematics and physics from the Ukraine. And he has a certificate in evaluation of public programs where he graduated in Canada. He is from Benin, and he is a Canadian citizen. He speaks fluently and in French, English, and Russian, as well as the Beninese local language. I think you all would agree with me that we're very, very privileged to have this citizen of the world and this expert in the field of labor law to address us. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Good morning, everyone. The Honorable Minister of Labor, Human Resource Development and Training has apologized for his absence. This morning he called me and said that he has an emergency with the Parliament. So he appoints his advisor to come for the opening ceremony. But since he made the decision only this morning, the advisor is informed only this morning. That's the reason why he's late. So he requests apologize. President, Ms. President of the African Labor Law Society, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. My name is Coffi Agossou. I wish to convey my sincere thanks to the organizer of the 5th conference of the African Labor Law Society for giving us the opportunity during the next couple of days to exchange on this year's theme, African Labor Law in a rapidly changing tech era. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of my keynotes is to plead for more agile and flexible labor legislation where social dialogue should play a key role. Since its creation in 1919, The International Labour Organization, ILO, has relied on its standard setting function as an instrument to promote social justice and universal peace. During its first centenary, the ILO, through its tripartite constituents, has made a lot of efforts to find timely, realistic, and coherent solutions to the question raised by the changing pattern of the world of work. Remember, in 2019, shortly prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and having taken stock of the transformative change experienced in the world of work, the International Labour Organization Conference adopted the ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work, which advocates for a human-centered approach to the future of work. In Africa, during this time, I mean in 2019, the 14th African Regional Meeting held in Abidjan in December 2019 adopted the Abidjan Declaration on advancing social justice, shaping the future of work in Africa, which calls for strengthening the efficiency of institutions of work to ensure adequate protections of all workers through strengthening and modernizing labor law. Also, this regional meeting, which we call Abidjan Declaration, call for strengthening the regulations, the processes, drawing on the international labor standard and respecting, promoting, and realizing fundamental principles and rights at work. Remember, last year, there was a new principle and right at work, which is based on health and security, what we call occupational safety and health, OSH. Inspiration was drawn from the ILO founding principle to renew the organization's social justice mandates. Ladies and gentlemen, new forces are transforming the world of work. The transition involved call for decisive action. Countless opportunities lie ahead to improve the quality of working lives, expand choice, close the gender gap, reverse the damages wreaked by global inequality, and much more. Yet none of this will happen by itself. Without a decisive action, we will be heading into a world that widens existing inequalities and uncertainties. Technological advances, I mean artificial intelligence, automations, and robotics will create new jobs, but those who lose their jobs in this transition may be the least equipped to seize the new opportunities. Today's skills will not match the jobs of tomorrow, and newly acquired skills may become obsolete. The greening of our economy will create millions of jobs as we adopt sustainable practices and clean technologies, but other jobs will disappear as countries scale back their carbon and resource-intensive industries. Changes in demographics are no less significant. Expanding youth population in some parts of the world and aging population in others may place pressure on labor market and social security systems.
Yet in these shifts lie new possibility to afford care and inclusive, active societies. We need to seize the opportunity presented by this transformative change to create a brighter future and deliver economic security, equal opportunity, and social justice, and ultimately reinforce the fabric of our societies. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 years ago, at the same time in March 2020, the entire world, including Mauritius, was hardly fighting against the COVID-19. The pandemic, which was a health issue at the beginning, has quickly shifted into socio-economic and social crisis. The impact of the pandemic and its various containment measures, together with protracted and interlocking crises such as climate change, armed conflict, Ukraine war, energy, and food shortage, has further exposed some of the blind spots of the existing legal and policy framework. We all bear witness to the exacerbation of inequality and poverty, the stalling or even reversible of the progress achieved in previous years. While the labor market outlook for 2023 varies considerably across regions, each region will continue to face a myriad of decent work deficits that are likely to worsen with global economic conditions and in face of long-term challenges like climate change. Hundreds of millions lack access to paid employment. Ladies and gentlemen, 473 million people, including 205 million unemployed people, are now in trouble due to the COVID-19. Those who are employed all too often lack access to social protection and fundamental rights at work. They count for 2 million people, those people who didn't have access to social protection. Furthermore, in 2022, an estimate of 214 million people, despite being employed, could not escape extreme poverty. Two extreme examples may come to mind. According to the latest estimate in 2020, around 160 million children were in child labor globally. Within them, 63 million girls and 97 million boys were in child labor. In Africa, the number of children in child labor has reached 92 million children, an increase of 20 million in 4 years. I mean, between 2016 and 2020. Within 4 years, the increase was 20 million children in child labor in Africa. There are therefore more children in child labor in Africa than in the rest of the world. It is estimated that more than 41 million of them were in hazardous jobs that directly affect the health, safety, and moral, physical, and psychological development. That's the definition of child labor. With the largest share of child labor taking place within families, which are still too often excluded from the protection awarded by the National Labor Court, legal reform remains a key element of a much needed multi-phased response to the child labor. The African continent had both the largest number of child laborers and the highest proportion of children in child labor among the major world regions. It is an issue, ladies and gentlemen. The second issue is the forced labor. In 2021, I mean last year, 2 years ago, it was estimated that 27.6 million people were entrapped in forced labor, with women and girls making up 11.8 million. The context and changing forms of forced labor or compulsory labor, including the fact that it is now mostly imposed by private actors, require that it be addressed in an integrated and coherent manner, including by supplementing the criminal law-centered response, which at this moment fails, among others, to recognize the importance role that employers' organization, workers' organization, and the labor institution can play in solving this issue of forced labor. While Africa should see employment grow of more than 3% in 2023, unemployment rates will remain relatively unchanged around 7.1%. And this one varies across the continents. Africa's labor market is still characterized, particularly in rural areas, by elevated rates of informal employment, underemployment, and working poverty. Its total informal employment rates increased from 84.3% in 2019 to 85% in 2022. This means that when the informal employment is increasing, it means that the deficit in terms of decent work also is increasing. Moreover, structural decent work deficits in the region continue to weigh on its ability to achieve inclusive growth. In sub-African, 60.8% of the employed population in 2021 was considered to be working poor. Despite having identified both at the global level and in respective countries some of the multiple challenges posed by digital transformation, it is only the persistence of decent work deficits coupled with the containment measure and the forced change over to remote or hybrid work arrangements during the pandemic, the need to sustain services deemed critical to the health, safety, and security of the public, while protecting frontline workers, thus compelled us to reassess with utmost urgency our legal and regulatory response. Now, coming to the theme of this conference, ladies and gentlemen, teleworking or remote working has brought the adequacy of legal provision to the fore. This has not only changed the way work is carried out and the environment of such work, but has also left certain areas of responsibility unclear in many countries. I repeat, teleworking or remote working has brought the adequacy of legal provision on the fore. This has This has not only changed the way work is carried out and the environment of such work, but has also left certain areas of responsibility unclear in many countries. For example, first, the current legislative provisions do not adequately cover the employer's duty of care with regard to the occupational safety and health while working from home. First issue. Second, in case of injury, the workers' compensation obligations of the employer are not clearly defined. Third, the right of withdrawal of a worker from work in order to protect work-life balance, requirement, and avoid stressful situations due to long hours of work is not warranted. I repeat, the third one, the right of withdrawal of a worker from work in order to protect work-life balance requirements and avoid stressful situations due to long hours of work is not warranted. And finally, digitalization of delivery of service has turned platform workers into independent contractors, and yet most of them are workers in dependent situations under the control of providers of the goods and services. So the border between independence and dependency for platform workers is not clearly defined. It is an issue. It is, ladies and gentlemen, it's against this background that during the recent research entitled The Next Normal, the Changing Workplace in Africa, which was conducted by the ILAW in 2022, most practitioners who were interviewed were of the view that legislation should be more agile and made flexible so as to be able to respond to the change that are fast taking place in the labor market, but still continue to provide the necessary regulation and protections. Laws relating to the operation of labor market institutions, such as labor inspections and alternative dispute resolution, may also need to adapt to cater for the effective functioning of those institutions with regard to issues that take place behind the walls of private properties. This may involve on how to deal with inspection in private homes without unduly infringing the right to privacy, and remote hearing of labor disputes also. As we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, dispute resolution bodies in some countries had to close them because legislations limited services which could be applied electronically, such as admissibility of certain types of evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, as highlighted the ILO new Director General, Mr. Gilbert Rumbo, the ILO's corpus of conventions, protocols, and recommendations, backed by its supervisory system, have shaped labor laws around the world. However, the current body of standards remain insufficient and inadequate to support the quest for social justice in a rapidly changed world of work, characterized by eroding employment relationships in gig and platform economies, the rapid digitalizations and automation, and the undeniable impact of climate change on jobs and livelihoods. The multiplication of environmental, social, and governance criteria within companies and investment funds are tangible proof of a normative demands by the very game of market forces. The impacts of COVID-19 on society and economics has exposed the interconnectedness and fragility of global supply chains. On the other hand, the pandemic has accelerated the rise of a digital economy whose manifestations, such as teleworking, may require appropriate labor standards yet to be developed. In this context, the new ILAW DG is already working on the strengthening of standards review mechanism, tripartite working group, with the objective of examining the current body of standard in light of the profound change taking place in the world of work, identifying gaps arising from those very changes, and developing proposals accordingly. Shortly, it means that for the new DG, for the new ILAW DG, there needs to change some of the convention or update them accordingly to the request of the labor market, to the request of the digitalization of the labor force, for example. That's the reason why on the 15th of June this year, 2023, during the 111th International Labour Conference, the Director General will launch the Global Coalition on Social Justice to better combat inequality. This will be a great coalition with World Bank, IMF, I mean the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, of course, the government organization, the government, the workers' organization, the employers, the social society, in order together to combat efficiently the poverty and the inequality in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, forging this new path requires committed action on the part of the governments as well as employers and workers' organizations. The need to reinvigorate the social contract that gives working people a just share of economic progress, respect for their rights, and protection against risk in return for their continuing contribution to the economy. The labor legislation should be more agile and flexible, and social dialogue should play a key role in ensuring the relevance of this contract to managing the changes underway when all the actors in the world of work participate fully, including the many millions of workers who are currently excluded. The ILO proposed a human-centered agenda for the future of work that strengthens the social contracts by placing people and the work they do at the center of the economic and social policy and business practice.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention and may God bless you.
Thank you so much, Director. Before you step off the podium, I'd just like to give him a token of our thanks on behalf of the Management Committee, and we thank you for that address.
Thank you.
It's very fancy gift, and many of you might receive one as you speak. So thank you so much, Director. I was taking copious notes, and it's a privilege just to hear you speaking. And what I liked was, there were a lot of reference to statistics, and you really spoke to the challenges that we are facing as a continent, many of which are unique or more pronounced because of the sort of economic situation that we find ourselves in the many countries. And I think what you said at the beginning and what you reiterated is this idea of an agile and flexible labor market where social dialogue takes center stage. So where the important stakeholders, the social partners, are at the table and are talking about these issues and responding to these rapid changes, which are it's almost like labor law is falling off at the wheels because there's just so much change that has happened. And you've emphasized the need to reinvigorate the social contract and to make it more inclusive, because we are living in a continent where many people are excluded. We have many people who are part of the working poor, many in the informal economy, child labor also, and issues around forced labor. So these are many of the challenges that we are facing. And you've spoken a lot, I think, to the challenges in a digitalized sort of environment where work is changing, the nature of work is changing, the place of work is changing, and that has far-reaching consequences in terms of how the employment relationship or how the world of work where there is no employment relationship is regulated. And there is a need to look at what is happening in terms of labor law, what are the shortcomings, and what can actually be done. I think this conference is a great forum for us to start having those conversations and have those debates and try to think about some answers to those questions. What you omitted, Director, as an African, was to mention that the new Director General of the ILO is from Africa. He's the first from Africa. He's from Togo. And that is Director General Gilbert Hongbo. And that's something for us to be proud of. So as of 2022, we've been singing Waka Waka, it's time for Africa. And we hope, that having a DG that comes from the continent that understands these issues, that there will be some reinvigoration and some strengthened sort of support that will be coming from the ILO and attention being paid to what is happening on the African continent as a result. So at this point in time, I'm going to call upon our colleague here in Mauritius. Some of you may know that we have country representatives within the ALLS. Mauritius is one of the countries where we have a rep, and a very strong rep, I must say. Shrivan Dabi works with ENS Africa, and he's going to introduce the speaker who is representing the minister. So I'm going to call upon him to officiate this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bamu. Our next speaker, as you've been told earlier on, would have been the Minister of Labour and Employment Relations, but unfortunately he couldn't be amongst us because of his urgent commitments in Parliament. All of you here in the room who practice employment law in one way or the other in Mauritius would know that this is one of the areas that has known a number of changes over the past years. As a matter of fact, the minister, who has been in office for more than 8 years now, has completely overhauled the legislative framework in employment matters and labor relations. From the introduction of the minimum wage to the enactment of the Workers' Rights Act in 2019, the introduction of completely new concepts like the Portable Retirement Gratuity Fund, and we have the honor of having the president of the Redundancy Board amongst us today. So the introduction of a completely different tribunal for retrenchments and redundancies, it is fair to say that we've seen a complete overhaul of the legislative framework for labor in Mauritius. And in the absence of a minister, we have the honor and the pleasure to have one of the kingpins behind all these reforms. Mr. Vassen Caremben has been at the Ministry of Labor, it is fair to say, for more than 4 decades now. He's currently occupies the position of advisor to the minister on policy matters and industrial relation matters. But prior to that, he was one of the directors within the ministry, and he had in his portfolio labor and industrial relations. So I have the pleasure to invite to the floor Mr. Vassen Caremben, who will be delivering the speech on behalf of the minister. Thank you.
Dr. Pamitsai Bamu, hope I pronounce the name well, President of the African Labour Society. Dr. Coffi Agossou, International Labour Organization Director. Mr. Rashid Hossain, GOSK, President of the Redundancy Board. Mr. Sivan Debi, Country Representative of the African Labour Law Society. Delegates, panelists, members of the organizing committee, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me at the very outset to tender the apologies of the minister to you all distinguished guests in this august assembly. He has been trying all his best to come, but unfortunately, he's taken up with an urgent commitment that he has not been able to make it. Again, apologies on behalf of the minister. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is an honor and privilege for me to be among you this morning for the opening of the 5th African Labour Law Society Conference. We are proud to welcome you in our Paradise Island, and we are sure that you will enjoy a fruitful conference, that you will also take some time to visit this beautiful paradise. Dear delegates, while going through the content of the various workshops of this conference, I've been quite impressed by its large array of themes and subjects, which shall be entertained. For instance, there will be a panel discussion on remote working, something which most countries have been implementing since COVID-19 pandemic. Another panel concerns privacy at work and workers' personal data. Others shall revolve around labor protection for workers on non-standard contract of employment, labor dispute resolution, and collective bargaining. There is no doubt that participants will share the expertise and enhance collaboration among countries in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the nature of work, the workforce, the world of work, work relations are being reshaped constantly by changing demographics, by greater global integration and technological advancement, and also by increased competition in product markets and in recruiting and retaining the best talents. Business across the world across industries are using technology more and more to boost efficiency and gain competitive advantage. The likes AI, robotics, and other emerging technologies are being used across all the different businesses, not just to automate simple repetitive tasks and back office processes, but increasingly to make complex decisions via predictive algorithms more quickly and accurately than their human counterparts. Technological advancements are affecting how we work, from the design of our workplaces to the makeup of our workforces. Emerging technologies are increasingly being used to improve how we manage people, but at the same time, they are raising concerns about rights of atypical workers, data privacy, and workplace monitoring. These issues present new strategic challenges for employers, employees, and policymakers. This is why labor laws have to follow suit and adapt to the ever-changing dynamics. If the world of work is ever-changing, governments have the responsibility to adapt the labor legislation so that workers do not become the victims of change. With this perspective, the government of Mauritius came up in 2019 with a new legislation, the Workers' Rights Act. As a result of that, need to reassess our labor laws. Prior to that, the multiplicity of legislation providing for similar terms and conditions of employment did not necessarily facilitate the application and enforcement of these legislation. For example, we chose to harmonize core provisions of employment prescribed in various remuneration regulations in the new Workers' Rights Act. We also decided to provide more flexible working hours and to reconcile operational requirements of enterprises with family responsibilities by introducing a regulation on work from home. Ladies and gentlemen, as a caring government, we are committed to ensure that workers' rights are protected in line with international labor instruments, including ILO conventions. We have, as a date, ratified 52 ILO conventions, comprising the 10 fundamental conventions, which includes the 2 Occupational Safety and Health Conventions, number 155 and 187. These 2 last conventions were included in the ILO Fundamental Conventions at the June 2022 ILC. Furthermore, it is a matter of pride for Mauritius to be the 3rd country in Africa to have ratified the ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment at the workplace. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the landmark measures that my ministry introduced was the national minimum wage in 2018. We all agree that you can do a lot in improving conditions of work. Much can also be done to better protect workers in terms of the labor rights and to ensure a safe and healthy work environment. Yes, but at the end of the day, what is of prime importance to the bread earner of a family is the amount of his remuneration, of his salary. The introduction of the minimum wage has been fundamental in improving the quality of life on this paradise island. It is also a measure which was in line with the vision of our government to drive Mauritius into a high-income economy. On the other hand, we also came up with additional safety nets to guarantee subsistence level of a worker by introducing the concept of protective order to recover unpaid wages on behalf of workers. Additionally, a wage guarantee fund has been set up to guarantee workers' remuneration up to an aggregate of 50,000 rupees in case of insolvency, bankruptcy, administration, receivership of enterprises where they are employed. Dear delegates, economic development is in fact about adoption of policies that leads to improved standard of living and social welfare. This implies pushing for the development of a labor market where fairness and equity shape the working conditions. When Mauritius enacted the new labor law in October 2019, it was in line with government's commitment to review and consolidate the fundamental rights of workers and to ensure better protection of workers' jobs, and considerations have been given to the following. 1, protection of workers against precarious employment by addressing the issues of discrimination, contractual workers, atypical workers, protection of wages, protection against unjustified termination, protection of workers against unfair settlement agreement. A security in transition framework to complement the existing workfare program, balancing work with family responsibilities, reinforcing workers' protection against harassment and violence at work, and the emergence of new forms of work arrangement related to the judicial economy and introduction of artificial intelligence in the work process. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the revolutionary measures in the legislation is the introduction of a portable retirement gratuity fund to adapt our regime of retirement gratuity to an increasing labor mobility. This new measure aims at ensuring a portable gratuity on retirement to any worker who shifts from one employment to another. I must admit here that we succeeded in that venture because we got the collaboration of workers' representatives also. A factor which is undeniably important for the new legislation to become a reality today is social dialogue. For social dialogue to work, government has to create a stable political and civil climate that enables autonomous employers and workers' organizations to operate freely without fear of reprisal. Authorities should therefore see to it by providing essential support in the process to the establishment of the legal, institutional, and other framework which enable the parties to engage themselves effectively. In the same vein, we have set up a national tripartite council comprising of government, workers, and employers representatives to promote social dialogue and consensus building on labor issues of national importance. As a matter of fact, our social partners form part of our decision-making process. We do believe in such collaboration. It helps not only in finding quick solutions in times of disagreement, of divergence, but also create a win-win situation where all parties are satisfied. Ladies and gentlemen, Mauritius has no natural resources. Our main asset and resource indeed is our people, our workforce. As a responsible government, our duty is to shield, protect our labor force against any discrimination and prejudice. It is worth noting that during the COVID-19 period, government went the extra mile in protecting workers by increasing the rate of the transition and employment benefit and by restricting the laying off of workers, whilst at the same time providing financial support to the enterprises so as to prevent the population from sustaining the burden alone. The government had to introduce a government wage assistance scheme and the self-employed assistance scheme by way of a financial support to businesses and to employees who would have otherwise become unemployed on a temporary basis, as well as to those employed in the informal sectors or are self-employed. Through these support measures, government provided a wage subsidy to employers in the private sector with a view to ensuring that all the employees earning wages up to 50,000 rupees were duly paid the salary capped to an amount of 25,000 monthly. The measures mentioned above urge unregistered businesses, self-employed and informal workers to register themselves electronically for them to benefit from the financial assistance provided by government. Furthermore, following the geopolitical crisis in Ukraine, compounded with high fuel prices and high cost of living, the government introduced a direct monthly income allowances of 1,000 rupees to eligible employees and self-employed individuals for the months of July 2022 up to June 2023. Dear delegates, allow me now to share with you what is being done in the region in terms of cooperation on labor issues. The Southern Africa Migration Management, SAM, project funded by the European Union is a 4-year project to improve migration management in the Southern Africa and Indian Ocean. The main objective is facilitation of safe, orderly, and regular migration and the prevention of irregular migration. Implemented by the ILAW in collaboration with the International Organization for Migration, IOM, United Nations Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, it focuses on South-South migration flows, identifying positive spillover effect of international migration on regional integration and regional economic development. The SAM project comprises 2 main components: labor migration and mixed migration. My ministry is more concerned with the labor migration component, which covers the following thematic areas: gender-sensitive policies and strategies regulating labor migration at national, regional level, international labor standards on the protection of migrant workers, bilateral labor migration, circular migration agreements across the region and the third countries, fair recruitment and decent employment for migrant workers, including regulatory legislation on private employment agencies aligned to international standards, social protection of migrant workers and regional qualifications framework at ERC's level and migrant workers qualification and labor migration statistics. Ladies and gentlemen, looking after the health of our workforce is another priority to this government. Occupational safety and health has become a fundamental right for workers since last year. And the Occupational Safety and Health Convention 1981, number 155, and the Promotional Framework for Occupational Safety and Health Convention 2006, number 187, have been declared fundamental conventions by the International Labour Organization in its 110th conference in 2022. My ministry has brought various amendments to the Occupational Safety and Health Act 2005 to address new and emerging occupational safety and health risks due to major changes in the world of work, and to ensure conformity with the Fundamental Convention on Occupational Safety and Health of the ILO. Ladies and gentlemen, on a concluding note, I would like to say that a skilled, mobile, and agile labor force has become the prerequisites to attain our economic and social goals. Government considers that a paradigm shift is fully warranted in our approach to labor regulation. It is believed that our economic development should hinge on fair labor standards rather than on a relaxation of labor protection. Without any doubt, this conference is the ideal platform to brainstorm on these topics. I wish you all the best. I wish you all a good conference and fruitful deliberation. Thank you.
Mr. Caremben, before you leave to your seat, on behalf of the African Labour Law Society, I have to present to you a gift token for your contribution to this event and for being present today. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning once again, and welcome to anyone who was not here when we started bright and early. Just before we start this session, Claire has shown me what you should be looking for in terms of the currency. So scattered around this room, and I think the foyer and all around where the conference is happening, you'll see little baskets like this that have pieces of paper in different colors. And somewhere in your conference program, you'll see our logo, which has the ALLS colors. So the challenge is for you to find one of each of these 5 colors. So you just take one little piece of paper, keep them together, and when you have the 5 colors, you can take them to Claire for a prize. So this is the African Labour Law Society currency. Now, moving to our session, we are on the panel discussion that is talking about remote working. And for many of us, it's something that started in COVID, during COVID. Personally, I've worked remotely since 2012 or so. And people used to wonder how I do that. They never really understood what I do. But now with COVID, it was suddenly like, yeah, no, I work from home and I was like, yeah, that's what I've been telling you I do all this time. So it's great to have, a greater number of people that are in this line of work. And we obviously want to talk about the implications, and there are very many, for labor law. So I'm going to call upon 2 colleagues who are women, both from Africa. Khemila is from Mauritius, and we're going to have Jacqueline Wamai, who is from Kenya. Unfortunately, Jeff could not be with us. So Jeff works with the Solidarity Center and he's based in the United States, but he's one of our very, very good friends, a very good friend to the society. So just to speak briefly about Khemila. Khemila Narraidoo is an attorney, or an associate barrister, here in Mauritius at Juristconsult Chambers, and she was called to the Bar of England and Wales in 2010. And she works in a number of areas, including civil, corporate, and commercial law. And she has a particular focus on employment, arbitration, and insolvency. She's someone who is not new to the society. For those who attended last year's conference, you would have encountered her, and she was speaking around some of the issues that she will be speaking about today. And then Jacqueline Wamai is from Kenya, as I said, and she is the Africa coordinator for a network called ILAW, which stands for the International Network of Lawyers Assisting Workers. And she is an activist, and she has over 9 years experience in defending and promoting workers' rights. She holds a master's degree in labor and a bachelor's in law from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. And she will speak a little bit about the work that ILAW has done in reviewing the regulation of remote working or teleworking, and some of the recommendations that are coming through from that research that they did. So I think you will join me in welcoming this pair of ladies. They're going to come up here and give a short input, and that will be followed by a question and answer with myself, just a little bit of a discussion, and we'll also throw it open to yourself. So please take note of any questions that you may have and feel free to ask them then. At this point, I'll call upon Khemila. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And for those who have traveled, very welcome to Mauritius. I don't know whether my slide is on, but yeah. First of all, I have to start with an apology. The title should actually have read, how has the concept of working from home evolved with the technological advancement, and not the other way around. So apologies to anybody who thought I was an IT expert. It's not the case. So let's dive directly into the subject, because I have a very strict timekeeper next to us. These are the points that I'll be covering during this short presentation. The focus would be mainly on workers' rights, working from home regulations 2022. We'll touch upon very quickly on Occupational Safety and Health Act 2005. And I'll briefly talk about programs and tools used to monitor the work performed from home. The Workers' Rights Working from Home Regulations 2022 appeared, unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 and lockdown that we had in Mauritius. But it's a good thing as well, because previously we had very short definitions when it comes to teleworking. So the first time in our law, there was an atypical worker definition under Section 17 of the Workers' Rights Act, which stated the definition including a person who performs teleworking or performs work through an information technology system, but does not include a self-employed or any other person whose working status is that of a person operating his own business or trade, a job, contractor, or consultant. I'm not going to be dwelling a lot on atypical worker, because I know my colleague Jackie has done in-depth research on that. My focus is going to be on the work from home regulation, more importantly, because it defines a home worker as a worker who works from home, but we will see that with the regulations, it goes beyond that in order to be able to englobe the concept. So the first time in our laws, just to touch upon, the Workers' Rights Act 2019 is very new, but right afterwards, the work from home regulations, when it was enacted, as I mentioned, due mainly to COVID-19 and lockdown, when people were expected to be working from home. The first section was very simple. It just stated that work from home, an employer may require any worker to work from home, provided a notice of at least 48 hours is given to the worker. But we see the importance of the work from home regulations because it comes in to define working from home and the home worker. Main contents about it. It comes to define home. It comes to say place of residence and other place as may be agreed by worker and employer. I believe we already see, unfortunately, a lack of precision here. And I say that knowing that the senior advisor from the Ministry of Labour is staring at me. But we do have an issue here because other place as may be agreed by the worker and the employer. And as you will see in the last bullet point, it says that the employer needs to be informed of the place where work will be performed. Now, unless you're having a camera on the face of the employee from beginning to end, you would actually not be able to know all the time where the work is actually being carried out. And having a camera on an employee, I mean, there are other panels who are going to touch upon data protection law, so I'm not going to talk about that. But I do think that further precision should be brought to that. We see that work from home includes, among other things, work performed on full-time or part-time basis, work performed on permanent, temporary, or occasional basis, but more importantly, it includes work performed through telemarketing online platforms. So there we see that the definition is included in those work from home regulations. Now we see that there is a notice of 48 hours. Now this is to be given by the employer to the worker. And as soon as the employer has adhered to this requirement, that is of giving the notice 48 hours before, the worker has to actually adhere to work from home. They don't actually necessarily have an option. On the other hand, the worker can make a request to work from home, and this does not need to be accepted by the employer. So we do see an imbalance in a way of between the power of the employer and the worker, but at the same time we need to bear in mind that it is the worker, the employer, pardon me, who has the responsibility regarding the organization of his business. And also, as I mentioned, the employer needs to be informed of the place where work will be performed. Now, the contents from the work from home, as we've seen briefly, but it also includes 3 schedules, more importantly. The first schedule is with regards to working from home arrangement. Now, whenever somebody goes on work from home mode, there has to be an agreement which is signed by both parties. The first schedule gives you a template of what should be contained in the contract, but of course the employer can add any further points that he wants to it. The second schedule is the one that I'm going to spend more time on because it contains the terms and conditions of employment. And the third schedule is just basically a template of the pay slip and what it should like, what it should contain. So the second schedule, pardon me, talks about working from home. We see that those regulations actually kind of bring a change to the definition, the concept of working from home. And we will see that in a minute as to why this is the case. So working from home in the regulations state that it should not be more than 45 hours. It is to run from Monday to Saturday. For those people who are already on flexi time and who is moving on work from home, the time frame for the work to be completed should be set out, and the core hours that the employee is supposed to be working should be set out as well. Remuneration is as per the agreement, which is already the basis of the relationship between the employer and the employee. Important to note that the remuneration of somebody working from home should not be less than a comparable worker who's carrying out the work at the office. Now, very disturbing factor with bringing in the disturbance allowance. And again, I'm going to take the risk of saying this in front of the senior advisor. What we need to bear in mind that in Mauritius, we have, in the legal jargon, we tend to have a difference between an employee and a worker. What we say is an employee is somebody whose basic salary is more than 50,000 rupees, whereas a worker is more somebody concerned as somebody who is earning a basic salary of less than 50,000 rupees. Now, why this disturbance allowance is disturbing is because a worker is expected to earn everything that is contained, all the rights, etc., which are contained in the Workers' Rights Act. Whereas for an employee, because he's getting a financial gain by getting more money, the employer and the employee can come to an arrangement with regards to what is contained in the contract of employment. Now, why this is important to note is because when it comes to the work from home regulations, no difference was made between these two types of categories. And normally, for example, an employee, such as a director or manager, is kind of expected by his employer to work during weekends or to work after office hours. The issue that we have with the disturbance allowance is that home worker performs with consent work during unsociable hours. So that person would get his or her remuneration plus the disturbance allowance, which is one time the hourly basic wage for every hour of work performed. And the unsocial hours is between 1 p.m. Saturday and 6 a.m. on the ensuing Monday, and between 10 p.m. on a weekday and 6 a.m. the ensuing day. My problem with this is that, therefore, if the director or the manager who's already earning, of course, a higher type of salary is supposed to be getting those allowance on top of it, we see this as a quite heavy impact on employers, heavy financial impact. So I think this should seriously be reviewed. The second schedule also talks about information technology equipment. So where the home worker is provided with any information technology, IT equipment, he shall not install or download any software without the approval of his employer. The home worker shall take all reasonable precautions to maintain in good conditions all tools and equipment provided by his employer and any installation thereof. We see that the onus is on the employee to take care of the equipment, to make sure not to download any dodgy thing. But I think the employer should also take the responsibility of installing precautionary measures on the, for example, the laptop that which is given, in order to avoid any kind of unexpected problems like this. Access to place of work. Now, the regulation provides that the employer can access the place of work with authorization and prior notice. So therefore, the employer will be accessing the actual home of the employee. We see kind of an imbalance here with having in place Article 9 of our Constitution, which provides for the protection for privacy of home. Obviously, we understand that the employer has to have access to see where the work is being performed, that is, it probably behind a desk and, you know, not lying outside and doing the work. But again, how much can the employer check on this? Whereas on the other hand, we see that whether actually the person is going into an employee's home, which is his privilege, his protection of privacy, which is provided by our Constitution. So again, we believe that further provisions should be added with regards to this. Just quickly to touch upon what we have before. So under the OSHA, there was the responsibility of the employer to make sure about the safety of the place of work, health, the structure of the building, etc. Now we see that with the advent of the work from home regulations, further provisions are being added to this. Like I mentioned, there's access to place of work. Injury at work. Now, this is something else which needs to be taken care of, because obviously somebody can say that he has been injured whilst sitting behind the desk and working there. Maybe he fell off the chair, etc. But how much can the employer actually check whether he was actually, I don't know, carrying out his work in the bathtub? So these are things to take into consideration. The last point, I did touch upon that with regards to the disturbance allowance. So quickly, last two slides on popular mediums used for employee monitoring. So there are software that provides a building timer for employees whenever they begin a task, and the employer can log in and assess how employees are making use of their time and evaluate the productivity of each employee. Another software can combine screenshots, time tracking, and automated reporting and assist in the accountability of the employees, providing online timesheet and time tracking functions. So these are popular modems that we see more and more employers are putting in place. On the other hand, this has to be balanced with the data protection rights, which we have in Mauritius as well. So I think there are other panels who's going to talk about that. So just a bit of food for thought. These are the implications of using technological software for work from home. We have to see whether there is actually possible breach of the right to privacy, as I mentioned, Article 9 of our Constitution. This also brings into perspective the trust existing in the relationship between the employer and the employee. And then last, but certainly not least, the role of insurance in such agreements. We do wonder how much the employer would want to extend the insurance that he has to the place of work, which is actually the home of the employee. So these are a few points from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khemila, especially for keeping to time. I think we've heard a lot about a very interesting regulation, which is keeping up with what is happening. And I think there are many lessons to learn. We're going to call upon Jacqueline to come and give her input, and then we'll give it over to discussion.
Good morning, everyone. So unlike Pami, who started working around telework, yeah, I think it should be okay. Perfect. Thank you. Unlike Pami, who started working around 2012 in telework, I started working in 2020, just when the pandemic was starting. And the same time, it's when I remember my last interview was when I was going to hospital to give birth to my last born. And I was somehow excited because I would have time to take care of my kid, but I really didn't know the kind of implications that that would come with. So I got into the mood and to a new role and all that, all excited. And then because my work is like, we have other regional coordinators who are based in Asia, Europe, the Americas, and also the United States. So sometimes the timings were always during the evening, and I was like, perfect. Then I have actually time to spend with my son during the day as I work during the evening. So for me, it was quite flexible and quite fun, I would say. And then the other thing is that I don't really have to worry about what I'm going to wear. I know that I'm the type of person that just opens my closet and I'm like, you know what, I have nothing to wear. And everyone around me is like thinking, what do you mean? Even my husband is like, what do you mean you don't have anything to wear? But I know some of you may actually know what I mean. So it was quite easy. And as time moved by, I realized that I would just want to dress up because at times it would really impact on how I feel during the day while I was working. And at times I would start having my makeup at around 3 p.m. And my daughter would ask me, Mom, I think you're losing it or something. I don't understand how you're doing makeup at 3 p.m. But I also started realizing that my daughter was telling me that I'm becoming more irritable with time. And then I had an issue. I started having an issue with my back because of sitting for long hours. But I attributed it to the fact that I had just given birth. So like I had all the reasons and defenses and all that. So I had to change my chair. And also I had to get new specs because the light was affecting me, you know. It was becoming a little bit too much. And then 1 year down the line, I realized that as an extrovert, I miss the social interaction. I missed like just calling or just telling my colleague, what do you think about this? Oh, just office gossip, you know. I know it's bad, of course, but well, there are times that it really helps, you know. At times you have someone to share with, or during lunch hour or break time or whatever, or even an idea, you know, like nowadays, if you want to share an idea with your colleague, you really have to ask them, when are you available and all that? Are you available for a call? You have Zoom. And then you're thinking, is Zoom even the right medium to really share what I'm going through or what kind of trouble I'm having, for example, with one of our members? But yeah, those are some of the working conditions that we are having when it comes to teleworking. So we have the long hours of work, because at times you're not really aware, as I've told you. I would prefer, like I preferred working in the evening, but at times during the day you're still working. My director would ask me, why are you replying to my email? It should be like 2 a.m. in the night. And I'm like, I've installed Gmail into my phone. And he's like, but then why are you not asleep? And I'll be like, I just decided to go to the washroom and just an email popped. So I felt the need to really respond to that email. There was also a blurry line between work and free time. So every time, even if I'm walking in the mall or doing shopping, I would see an email and I would tell whoever that I'm with, or just sit somewhere in the cafe, talking to maybe to one of my friends, or, you know, and I would just be busy replying to an email. So that blurry line between free time and work time really came out very strongly for me. So I thought that the issue of isolation, it's because I'm just being me, like an extrovert person, but it was actually a thing that most teleworkers were actually going through. So we also have electronic monitoring. There was a time I was asking my colleagues, so our boss can actually see wherever that you are. So if you're moving with your laptop in the mall, or maybe just going to the rural areas, they know that you've actually changed your location, you know. And there are others, at least we do not have those extreme ones, like those ones like have to see what you're doing. The camera has always to be on and all that. And I saw someone making fun of how now workers have actually improvised a way to really ensure that your keyboard is still tapping as much as you're not there, you know. It was quite funny. I saw that. I don't know whether you saw that. But there are actually different occupational health and safety when it comes to teleworking, but also psychosocial problems, ranging from loneliness, irritability, worry, but also guilt. It was funny that when I was in the office, I never felt guilt, like spending more time with my kids. But when I was teleworking, I felt that I'm not spending enough time with my kids as much as I was around, because most of the time I was distracted. I was always on my phone. I was always checking my emails and all that. But with time, I really had to learn how to work in teleworking, and how do I really separate these, and how do I really do away with the guilt and all that. After now we did our research. So we also have a risk that most workers, and we were talking about that during break time, that have to really take care of all the costs, from the laptops, the electricity. I don't know whether there is electricity. It's called what? Allowance. I heard about disturbance allowance. Is there electricity allowance? Do you get all these kind of costs? But also when it comes to insurance, and there are all those issues that come with teleworking that are not really all here. So at the International Lawyers Assisting Workers, we started doing global research. We've done some in Moldova, in Europe, in Poland, but also for Mauritius, an assessment of the teleworking legal framework in the Republic of Mauritius. We've done one in South Africa that looks at teleworking in a very unequal society. We've also done a regional one at the Americas, because the Americas has like, so many countries have regulations when it comes to telework. So we have like 10 case studies on that. So talking about implementing telework in an equal society. So just picture these, probably, let's say there was that opportunity to work in the position that I was. And then I was just fresh from, let's say, law school. And there I was, maybe living in a place that, I don't know whether you guys know that place that grinds maize in the rural areas. even in the urban centers anyway. I don't know whether you know it, but it makes a lot of noise, yeah? But then you have to hold meetings and all that. But also there's what we call load shedding. So my South African comrades and colleagues, you know about that. So the load shedding, access to electricity. And we are talking about even like people in urban areas. In Nairobi, when it rains and it pours, chances are that we are going to lose electricity. We've never really known the connection of the two, but it always happens almost all the time. But then there's also the issue of internet penetration. You hear people on Zoom call. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Like that's something that I'm used to, like just asking someone whether they can hear you and all that. But despite you having internet connection, there are some that don't have internet connection, with 43% in Africa do not have like internet penetration, compared to 66% at the global scale. So we have also the digital skills gap, which is in Africa 1.8 and 5 between that, the index, but then the global average it's a 6. We also have that sub-Saharan Africa has the most expensive data in the world. We are not talking about we are talking about the data charges are just way expensive. Just imagine that, for example, in Equatorial Guinea, the price of 1 GB of data costs $44, $6.44. So that's quite high. Equatorial Guinea, so Africa has the average of $6.44, but Equatorial Guinea has 49.67. 1 GB of data. So you can imagine if you have Zoom and the way like Zoom just milks your data. So you can imagine what it could cost you a month to really get into telework. So we saw that there was a rise of regulations during the pandemic, but also before the pandemic. An example is Mauritius. But we saw that in Morocco, they had regulation, Togo, Mozambique, Angola, Togo, Mauritius, but also there is some discussions in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the social partners are really thinking of coming up with a regulation on teleworking. So one of the issues that came out during the research that we did is on defining telework. There are some elements that you see. There was a trend in terms of defining telework. And this is, it has like, you have to work away from the employer's premises. Secondly, it has to be through electronic or interacting the use of technology. The other thing is that at times the locations differ depending with the definition. At times they say that alternative locations outside of the central office, the premises of the employer. But also, interestingly, it's about an employment contractual relationship. So that came out very strongly. But you'll see in regulations that we looked, they do not really necessarily encompass all the elements of what telework is all about. Sometimes it leaves room for more interpretation or there's ambiguity. Let's check the definition of Mauritius. But before Mauritius, in Togo, it defines it as the performance of work carried out in whole or in part by the worker, in particular by means of information and technologies away from the place where the work should have been carried out. We see that there's a lack of an employment relationship. So you can say that as an independent contractor, then I am a teleworker. In Mauritius, in the Workers' Rights Act in 2019, there's a definition, and we also, my colleague Khemila described how the definition is out. But what we see between the home-based regulation and the Workers' Rights Act is that there's an overlap between the two regulations. One provides an opportunity where even as an independent contractor, you can actually be deemed as a teleworker. So there's that risk of misclassification, but no real distinction between what is telework, a typical work, but also work from home in Mauritius. So ILAW has what we call a feature of work wiki, a feature of labor law wiki, where we have we take one area of the law and then we get like model clauses. So in our model clause, we really defined what is telework, encompassing all the elements of teleworking. So we define it as the organization and or performance of work, which within framework of an employment contract of relationship, a person performs at work or at any alternative location other than the employer's premises through the use of information and communication technology. So I'll go through first on the principles that are there in teleworking. And one of them that Khemila mentioned out is about the issue of voluntariness and reversibility. So the Workers' Rights Act, Section 7, it says that, and I'm just going to echo what Khemila says about the notice of 48 hours, like you can be asked to go into telework. And there's also an opportunity for a worker to really say that, is there an opportunity for a worker to say that, now I'm done with telework, I want to go back to the office, given like different issues anyway. So, but we see that according to the home regulations, but also the Workers' Rights Act, these provisions appear to give employers a unilateral ability to require workers to telework and to reverse telework arrangements because of the definitional also issue is still unclear. Telework falls under the coverage of which legislation? Of course, I've talked about that. So another interesting thing is that Section 31 of the Atypical Work Regulation states, and I'm going just to read the last part, that the worker, the employers actually, one can say that they do not want to work from home and they want to work in the office, or the other way around, but an employer can actually say no, and they give under reasonable circumstances. So what are these reasonable grounds? The burden of additional costs, inability or impracticability to review working arrangements, the detrimental impact on quality of work or service, but also the detrimental effect on the ability to meet customers' demand, unsuitability of the job to work home from home arrangements, but also unsuitability of the proposed working environment at the atypical workers' residence. So we see that there is that opportunity for an employer to say, okay, you go home or you come back to the office, but the employee cannot really have that opportunity to say that they want to go back to the office because of different issues. One of the areas that we felt that so many practitioners on labor law are asking was, how do you even regulate issues to do with occupational health and safety? For example, the falling off the chair, or you're going to get your coffee and then you sleep in the kitchen. Like, is your entire house a workplace? And even if the occupational health and safety, the employer just comes, will he have like the opportunity to do a check of everything in your house? Or are they, sometimes when you're teleworking, you're just on bed, you know, like just laying there. Does that also make it a workplace? So those are some of the questions that came out. And also maybe you have a small place outside and you just want to, you know, to have the sun, you know, for vitamin D or something, and then something happens to you. So what we found out, and this came from the trade unionists from Mauritius, they said that inspections are not carried out and teleworkers are actually very reluctant to report any kind of incident whatsoever. And of course, topics of ergonomics are not covered and considered under the legislation, like what kind of, you know, what kind of chair should you be having? What kind of a table should you be having? If it's typing, for you to avoid that backache, you know, what kind of angle? Because most teleworkers use laptop, right? And you're always like leaning, you know, you have, and I've seen, there's a time that I was almost like walking like this, because most of the time you're always leaning, but you do not have like a screen mirroring, you know, option of having like that, it's called what? Why am I forgetting the name? Not the desktop, but the screen mirrors. At least you can mirror from your laptop to the screen. At least it gives you a better view. So, so labor inspectors, so people were asking, how do we ensure that there is OSH when it comes to teleworking? And we have like creative ways of doing that. For instance, and but before I go to that point, I'm going to state that there's also an issue of the right to privacy. So the right to privacy really came out very strongly. Like, will I allow a labor inspector in my house? Will I allow my employer in my house? And how do we go about these occupational health and safety issue? So the labor inspector can actually develop assessment and inspection tools that take into account needs for privacy, including virtual assessment tools and virtual interviews with workers. So through that, they can know whether a place is safe or not. I'm already being told that I'm 2 minutes. So let's see how that is going to go. So there are different ways of ensuring occupational health and safety at the workplace. So it's not really impossible to ensure that there's occupational health and safety. So the other important thing, and in Mauritius, what we found out that when the laws were being developed, there was no consultation when it came to social partner. So the issues of freedom of association, collective bargaining, and social dialogue is still very key. And that's why in developing these laws, we need social partners. The second thing, how do we ensure that trade unions can actually continue recruiting members in telework arrangements? So that's also like a problem with trade unions, right? Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, exactly. So what kind of access can be granted to trade unions? And that's an interesting topic. But anyway, moving forward, the real question is, are telework employees, should they be employees? That was some of the issues that came out from the regulations. So there's an issue of definition, the looseness, it's not regulated, the issues of voluntariness, definition, no recognition of the right to disconnect. Do you have the right to disconnect? So that's a whole new phenomena anyway. When I say that I'm not logging into email or onto social media or anything, and my employer cannot even access me. Is that a right? Or I can actually be reprimanded. So those are the issues that we've really covered in our ILAW's Future of Labor Law Wiki model, where it has all those issues from privacy monitoring and data protection, collective rights, equipment expertise, equal treatment before the law between the people who are actually teleworking and the workers who are working from the office. Should you be treated differently? And if, for example, an employer is based in the United States and they have like teleworkers across Africa, how are they supposed to be treated? Are they supposed to be treated the same? So it should be defined in the law how this equal treatment goes. So the key recommendation is that for countries that have no regulations, it would be important not only to actually just amend the law, but look at an opportunity to come up with a different regulation altogether for teleworking, because there will be problems. There are very different issues that come out when it comes to teleworkers. But in Mauritius also, there's a need for promulgation of a new and also integrated instrument for telework, for more clarity with special consideration of the different aspects of telework with the involvement of social partners, because you've seen like we have like different regulations in Mauritius, which are at times they go over each other, and thus there's misclassification, ambiguity, and all that. So in conclusion, according to the ILO, most future workplaces in Africa will actually be in person or hybrid, but not fully remote. So that was quite interesting, given the fact that during COVID, everyone was excited now, or there was excitement by researchers, and there was also worry from trade unions that now we are all shifting to remote work. But the fact is that labor laws have really struggled to keep pace with rapid workplace changes. But also general application of labor law to telework is not enough. For example, the issue in South Africa, for instance, or in Kenya, where we did the research and we saw that there was a reluctance in terms of the practitioners saying that we need a new law, and some of them were like, we can actually use the general law to actually apply to telework. So we also have like the issue of a more gender responsive approach to regulations, because as I've given my story, there's an opportunity to continue enshrining the very gendered issues that come out when it comes to the workplace, but also the issues of social and economic inequalities. We should be careful of that for policymakers. This is quite important. But also telework should enjoy the same rights as all the other workers who are working at employers' premises. And finally, there is a need for employers to take measures to ensure the inclusion inclusion of teleworkers in the working community, such as providing opportunities to meet with other colleagues or to actually engage in social gatherings in person, but also virtually, to deal with the issue of isolation, but also other issues that comes with the issues of isolation. Thank you very much. Asanteni sana.
Thank you very, very much, Jacqueline, for an animated presentation. And speaking of experiences, I thought of one very embarrassing one where I was in a meeting and I gave an input, which I thought was very substantial, and proceeded to put my laptop on the bathroom counter. Oh, no, not embarrassing like that. Don't worry. I put it on the bathroom counter and I got into the shower. And I was in the shower and I thought, yeah, like everybody else is going to have their say and I don't need to say anything. And I heard someone saying, so Pami, what do you think? So midstream, like with the water and all of that. And it took me like a couple of minutes to get out and say, well, I'd already said blah, blah, blah. And they were like, no, but we're asking on this question. You didn't address this question. And I was kind of out of breath and all of that. So, I mean, those are some of the issues that come up in this context. And had I slipped and fell in the process of the scramble, I don't know that I would have wanted to report it as I was working technically, but it would be very, very difficult to convince my employer, for compensation in that regard. So thank you so much for your inputs, colleagues. And I'm just going to ask Khemila, because she didn't have the benefit of stealing a few minutes like Jackie here. So I'm just going to ask Khemila. I know she wanted to talk a little bit more about the issue of confidentiality before we open it to the floor. This issue of work from home. And I remember my dad does certain work and he was working from home and actually got to a point where the client said, you have to move out of your home if you're going to be able to do this work, because there's some very, very sensitive information that should not be accessible on a home network and it needs a server and etc. So could you talk a little bit about what are the measures that are being taken or should be taken to ensure that an employee deals with confidential information when working from home?
Thank you. Actually, I have to say, I don't know what are the measures that can be put in place, but I think employers should put their mind to the fact that there is concretely a confidentiality issue. I mean, for example, my background is legal, so we deal with clients' information, litigation cases, and bizarrely, in our profession in Mauritius, quite a few lawyers are married between themselves. So what do you do when you're when obviously the lawyers are from two different firms and they're discussing the information of their client? They could also be discussing the strategy to be taking in court with regards to a litigation matter. And then you get the husband lurking behind and hearing about things like that. So I actually don't know what kind of measures we can put in place, but I think employers should put their mind to the fact that this is an issue. It does exist. How much, especially, let's say, for example, there was COVID in Mauritius and there was lockdown. How much can you ask your husband to stay out of the house, whilst I'm doing the Zoom meeting or Microsoft Teams meeting and discussing very important things, confidentiality, strategies. And I mean, it doesn't happen only for lawyers, for example. It could be big firms' strategies about a merger and acquisition, and things like that are very, very confidential. I mean, we do due diligence on entities and we know information like that. There is a huge risk of having competitors getting hold of that. So I think this is something to bear in mind and see how technology can be advanced even more to cover things like that.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm just going to abuse my position as chair. I found something very interesting. You spoke about a disturbance. You said there's a very disturbing issue, and then you spoke about the disturbance allowance and the reference to the fact that, you know, it could be costly for employers. One of the questions I have is, how do you see the disturbance allowance in relation to something like overtime? And what would you say is an alternative to paying a disturbance allowance to, you know, maybe it might serve as a disincentive to, you know, like overly relying on people working these unsociable hours and ensuring that there's some kind of work-life balance and that one can draw a line somewhere.
Yeah, why I was saying it's a disturbing factor because, as I'm saying, it's a huge financial weight on the employer. But one way of dealing with that would have been to make the distinction between whether this, at least this part of the work from home regulations applies to what I was describing, the definition of employees. That is somebody earning more than 50,000 as a basic salary. So that's one way of dealing with it, that this part should not have applied to employees. But I know probably a lot of people in the audience are going to throw things at me for saying that, but I don't think it should apply to employees because you will get too many companies in Mauritius who are going to close down because they cannot adhere to this provision of the law.
Okay, thank you. Jackie, do you have anything to say with regard to this? I remember in our discussions, you talked about this issue around equality and the distinction between an employee and a worker.
Well, it's very important to really to discuss this because as we know, there are like some principles that have been developed in terms of who is an independent contractor, who's an employee, who's a worker. And that's why even the convention, the Home Workers Convention, from ILAW's perspective, we feel that it does not really apply to teleworkers. It applies to the home workers who are not necessarily teleworkers. A teleworker can be a home worker, but a home worker is not necessarily a teleworker. So there's a whole difference in that. And also the debates that have been going on in terms of misclassification of employees as independent contractors. So it's quite important even for policymakers. And as you pointed out, that it should not apply to employees, like what should apply to employees, because in our definition, it's important to include the fact that teleworking involves an employment relationship kind of a scenario rather than a general term of a worker. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think at this point, I'd like to ask those of you in the audience, do we have our roving mics? I'm not sure where Connor is, or the AV team. We should be having roving mics. Okay, there's one. Okay, there we have Umang. Okay, two. So you can just raise your hand, and please, as you make your input, ask a question or a comment, please just indicate, tell us your name, where you're coming from, and then go ahead and make your input. And please keep it as brief as possible so that we can take a number of questions or inputs. Thank you. Okay, we have Stefan in the middle. Okay, I have the director and then the gentleman behind him as well. Do we have another? Okay, another gentleman. Any ladies asking questions? Okay, here we have our deputy chair, the PSCBC. My sister, now I forgot, Kopana. Yes, okay. Start with the lady. Yes, it's Women's Month. Should be Women's Month every month. Thank you.
No, thanks very much, President. And indeed, we need to acknowledge the presentation that coming from South Africa, I think there's a lot that we have learned and that we have missed and which we think that our bosses, if they're here, they might also agree with us that they are owing us. Because where we come from, it was just working from home without benefits, like you said, the disturbance allowance and whatsoever. But my question is on the monitoring part, that how do you really do it in a sector? I'm just asking, thinking aloud as to how big or how small are your, what is it? Your institutions whereby indeed you can be able to monitor it either through the two other processes that you mentioned. That was it not a way of victimization? Because if I'm working from home, like you are saying, you work from this particular hour to this hour, and I decide now that like in the first session, we were able to finish even prior the expected time. So you find me that by the time I'm home, I'm done with whatever I was doing. Now you are coming with your monitoring, and then you are saying you are not at work. So my question is really, if we are to adopt it as South Africans, how best and how, in fact, how are you doing it and how effective is it? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Could we have the next? No, I think let's take a round so that we, thank you.
Okay, good day.
Okay, oh, sorry.
Okay, yeah, I'm Tutuzi Sibego from South Africa. I come from South African Municipal Workers Union. I just want to indicate that in my country, the only distinction that we make is between the employee and an independent contractor. But I hear that there is a worker and also an employee. So my question is, in terms of the rights, what is it that the employee has that the worker does not have? And maybe the second question is, why such a distinction if the threshold is not that much, the 50, is it 50 rupees or below that? So what are the reasons for that? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, we had the director and the gentleman behind him. Director Agossou.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentations, which were very, very interesting. I just want to make sure on a few things. First, for the equipment at home, who support the equipment, including the cost of the internet, the cost of the chair that the employer have to use, all this one. In your experience, do you think that the employers accept to support this additional cost for the employer? That's the first thing. The second thing is that in your reflection, did you make a difference between some kind of occupation? Because not all occupation tackle to work from home. For example, the drivers. The drivers, how they can telework is not possible to telework from home. So in this kind of work, how can we make sure that there is no discrimination? Or how do you think that we can manage the positive discrimination? Of course, the ladies and women, all of this one also. And the people with disability also. It is another issue. These people, how do we, in your experience, in your research, do you think answers for such issues? Of course, at ILAW, we didn't not yet resolve this one. The reflection is still going. Even in our office, we have some kinds of regulation for the staff, but not fully. We still are using the old regulation, but we are thinking about that. And that's the reason why in my speech, I say that the Director General wanted to regulate, but his regulation will be what you are already funding as a result of your research.
Mateo.
Okay, thank you, Director. Yes, I'm taking note. I'm taking note.
Good morning. Thanks, President. Would like to also express our appreciation for the presentations. They were informative. It's Modise Letsatsi from South Africa. I work for the Department of Public Service and Administration there. With regard to the notice that an employer must give an employee 48 hours, you know, for what is the rationale there? Is it that the employee must prepare, you know, the working space, or, you know, just to get a sense around the rationale? And while still there, so the employer can access the place. Does it mean then that the employer also provides, for instance, you literally establish a home office at, you know, for the place where work is going to be done, or it's the employee who determines and then the employer just comes in to check if that place is suitable? And what has been the experience since the implementation of this law? Well, back home we don't necessarily have, and you could say, an overarching law that regulates this thing. But of course, each company, especially in the private sector, they would have policies. In the public service, yeah, we worked from home during COVID, but we really do not have a policy per se. That process is probably still out there to be revisited some time to come, but we don't have a policy. But that does not suggest that departments do not make provisions for people to work from home. There are, but it's more ad hoc arrangements, as it were. We hope to formalize them if my leader here, Caspar, agrees at some point, and the chairperson. I know they will come to the party at some point in time, not now, but probably in the near future. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we'll just have Stefan, and I take note. Yes, definitely advisor to the minister will give you an opportunity, because there's a lot of feedback that has come through on the regulation. Okay, thanks. I note the gentleman behind, but we'll have Stefan. Okay, and then my sister Robina as well. Okay,
thank you. Stefan van Eck from University of Pretoria. I would like to ask the first speaker whether, just on the issue of definition that we saw that you added, would that be wide enough to cover also what in some countries are called platform work or on-demand work, a type of situation where you've got Uber as an example, or other types of services? I know Uber is prohibited here, but just having a look at that definition in itself, it does seem that it could possibly go wider than just one employer placing an employee at home.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe what we could do is I will just recap the questions that we have so far, and I'll ask you, Khemila, to respond. And because we have the special advisor, maybe you can also respond in relation to those that relate to the regulation specifically. So we had my sister from South Africa who was talking about monitoring and maybe the capacity when you look potentially at small companies that might not have the necessary tools and technology to do that, and the possibility that monitoring could lead to victimization, particularly where maybe somebody is really quick and able to do their work before like a regulated time in which they're working. So like, how do you protect workers under those circumstances? And then I think for you, Khemila, is this issue around the gentleman from SAMU, the comrade from SAMU talked about employee and independent contractor in South Africa, and the fact that here in Mauritius we have the employee versus the worker, and what are the benefits that an employee has over the worker, and what is really the rationale for having this distinction. And then we had Director Agossou talking about the equipment that one needs to be working from home and the cost of the internet and so on, the chair that's appropriate. Who bears the cost? Is there a responsibility on the employer or a duty on the employer to make provision? And is there a difference in the kinds of occupations that are subject to this kind of regulation? Because some jobs don't lend themselves to working from home and telework. And then how do we address discrimination and also manage positive discrimination? And he alluded to people with disabilities. And then Ntate Modise from the Public Service Administration spoke about the 48-hour notice and so on. Okay, so I'll prompt you, maybe talk to what you can speak to, and then I'll prompt you.
I don't think I remember everything. I think the first question I think I remember is with regards to expenses. In our work from home regulations, we do have a provision which states that expenses such as electricity, telecommunication, and I think water as well, those expenses are to be borne by the employer. So this is one good thing and a help that is brought to the employee, because don't worry, even in Mauritius, we get those connectivity problems, but true it is that the price of internet is not low as well. So this is a help that the employee does get. Okay. I think there was a gentleman who spoke about the distinction between independent contractor and employee. We do have this definition in Mauritius as well. The distinction that I was making between worker and employee is more with regards to provisions of the Workers' Rights Act. Basically, for example, annual leave. For example, annual leave in Mauritius. There's a set number of annual leave that a worker should get. But this part of the Workers' Rights Act falls under a part where the employer and the employee can decide together as to what would be the figure, what would be the number of annual leaves that the person gets, because of the fact that this person actually is getting, the remuneration is higher. This is one distinction that we make. But we have to remember that our Workers' Rights Act is very pro-employee. There's a lot of protection, a lot of benefits under it for employees. But this is one leeway, let's say, that is given to employers because the person is getting a financial gain, but still, he's still going to be protected and get all the rights and benefits which is provided in the Workers' Rights Act. But there is certain sections which the employer and the employee can fall into an agreement with regards to what will be provided for. And the contract of employment is going to be what presides. That's about what was the.
And then the 48 hours is the rationale for the 48-hour notice.
Yes, the rationale for the 48 hours, I would have thought the same thing. It's the preparation of the employee as to where they will be working, whether they have all the tools available to them at home to be able to carry out the work. There was also, I think, a question with regards to when the whether it is actually being carried out, or whether employer would actually come to the place and check the place where the person is going to be working. I have to say, in my experience, I wonder whether this is actually being done. I have not heard really of the employer going to the employee's place and checking whether where the person is going to be carrying out the work. I think the rationale also behind that would be because, as I mentioned earlier on, the tools which is the property of the employer is going to be under the responsibility of the employee. So such as a laptop, for example, the employer, I believe, has a right to know where the person is going to be carrying out the work, because there's the use of the tool. I spoke earlier on about the confidentiality issue. So another thing is to know where the person is going to be working and dealing with confidential information. For example, he's not going to be sitting by the beach and talking about confidential matters of the company. So this is important to know where the person is actually going to be carrying out the work. So I think all these things brings up to the 48 hours that is mentioned in our law.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question related to the platform work and whether this definition of telework would sort of encompass that and maybe provide a loophole.
Yes, no, I think you're quite right. It is quite a definition where other people can actually fall into that. But I think Jackie was also talking about atypical workers. This one actually brings in an even more wider definition. And as much as I can see many people actually falling under that definition as well. So you mentioned Uber, but then also, unless I'm mistaken, Uber would be kind of a contractor. So I don't know how really it works, what kind of agreement that would be in place, because you will need to see what is the agreement in place between the employer and the employee. So this is going to also affect whether the person is going to be falling under work from home.
Okay, thank you. At this point, yeah, I'll break the panel and maybe ask the special advisor to give any comments since we have you in the room. Oftentimes we talk about these regulations and the people that drafted them are not present. So we'll have the benefit of that and hope that you've been taking copious notes for the revisions that are coming. Could we have a mic, please, for the special advisor to the minister? Should we? Senior advisor, sorry. Could somebody grab this one? And may we also have access to the chat if maybe there's a question, we can start with a chat from someone who is online when we take maybe a quick couple of rounds. Thank you very much, Special Advisor.
I have
Senior
been
advisor.
listening attentively to the two panelists, Jacqueline and Khemila. I've taken note of their observations. I would start with the disturbing factors. The disturbance allowance working during unsocial hours, which Khemila mentioned. But if we read the regulation correctly, the regulation provides that workers cannot be obliged to work during unsocial hours, which is defined under the law as being work performed after between 1 p.m. on Saturday and 6 a.m. on Monday. This is the hours which the law, the regulation defines as being unsocial hours. And then during weekdays, it is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. But there, the employer cannot oblige, cannot force. It is there in the law. It is done with the consent of the worker, of the employee. So any employee who has work during the day And the hours of work is exactly the same as the hours of work which is performed at the office of the employer. If it is 45 hours, it should be 45 hours and not more. The disturbing allowance is over and above overtime that is being paid, 1.5 or double or treble the rate. And the disturbance allowance is one times the normal rate. This is, so the aspect of disturbance allowance and work during unsocial hours is not something that is being imposed. It should be done with the consent of the worker, and there should be an agreement on that. The next issue is that the issue that the director of ILAW raised. What about the tools, the equipments? Khemila replied, the tools and equipments as provided in the law should all the costs regarding the tools, equipments, maintenance, and other materials are under the responsibility of the employer. That is, the employer should bear the cost of all these things. Electricity, water, telecommunication expenses, Wi-Fi, everything is at the expense of the worker. Okay? Is at the expense of the employer, sorry. So the worker does not have to bother about any cost to be incurred regarding these equipments and materials to be used. And their employer is bound to refund any additional cost as per agreement. This should be clear. Certainly, the ministry, now I heard Jacqueline saying that we should know in what context the work from home regulation came into being. We said that the pandemic, COVID-19, was there, no work, complete lockdown, and then the ministry had to work. But every time that the law is being examined, is being passed, first the social partners, the employers and the trade unionists, they are asked to submit their proposal and they are consulted. They submit their inputs and the government proceed with the amendment to the law or a new regulation. So the work from home regulation was prepared in a particular context. The ministry is improving it and it is working on it so that, and has already requested the social partners to submit the proposals. So it is not done as if the ministry deciding on its own without any consultation. So I wanted to clarify this issue of consultation. Even the Workers' Rights Act, when it was, the minister was working on it, we had wide consultation with the employers, representative, Business Mauritius, and all the trade union and confederation existing actually in Mauritius. So we have taken note of some of the observation, but I want to raise that issue. We have difficulty certainly regarding inspections to be carried out at the home, if the work is being performed at home of an employee. So the ministry has to inform the employee that we are coming for an inspection, just as the issue of privacy regarding the employer's visit to the home of the worker. The employer cannot come at his own whims and fancies, he decides to come, he's on his way, and I enter the place of Jacqueline to see, to inspect, to see whether she's here at home or working according to our terms and conditions. No. Prior notice should be given, at least, and the employee can say, no, can you come tomorrow, because I am taken up with the children. The children are at home, heavy rainfall, no work today, so I'll be busy with the children and everything. There may be a consultation and consent and the date and time fixed for the visit. Certainly, we have very, very great difficulty in visiting, carrying out inspection. I don't want to take much of your time. I know you. So, but whenever we get a complaint from an employee, from a worker, we go there quickly, okay, the next day or on the same day to visit the place of work with the consent of the worker. So thank you. I've taken note of all those observations, and we'll see in the future, because the law is being improved, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senior Advisor Caremben, for that input. I think it was a unique opportunity that we've had. This is a very unique regulation that speaks to something of such importance that it was of great benefit to have you here and to have your perspectives. I'm going to eat very slightly into the time of the next panel, so I hope that the next dev and team are ready. We have a bit of a technical issue that we'll have to manage, but I'll just quickly allow Jackie. Unfortunately, we can't take more questions, but just to have a few last words on the issue of discrimination and monitoring, please.
Thank you. So on discrimination, of course, there is this concept that they call positive discrimination, but at times I wonder if that concept should be in existence, or it should just be abolished and have something like affirmative action or something that is different from positive discrimination, which I think makes a lot of sense, because there are always very peculiar issues when it comes to also telework and also the employees or the workers who are in teleworking. So depending to what it is, but also depending with what laws are there when it comes to discrimination. Right now, like the laws on discrimination have always evolved over time. And especially when it comes to different constitutions in Africa, they are quite developed when it comes to the right to non-discrimination and what really non-discrimination includes, including the precedents that have been set there by different courts. So I think it really matters onto what really are we looking at when we talk about positive discrimination. But also it's important to ensure that there's equal treatment, that, for example, workers who are working in the office are not treated differently from the workers who are teleworking. So that's quite important. But because you'd see that sometimes what has happened like when we all started talking about telework is that some employee contracts were actually they were terminated, and what happened is that they had another contract that is called teleworking contract, which actually what it did is that it converted their working relationship into an independent contractor. So those are the kind of issues that may come up when it comes to teleworking. But also on the issue of access, on monitoring, I think there, as I had started saying, there are different ways on ensuring that there's protection on privacy and monitoring and how that can be done. One of it is to ensure that workers have the right to say no. I don't have to be compelled to really ensure that everyone, that the labor inspector or the employer has access to my home. The second thing is, if a worker says no, then there needs to be another way of ensuring that there's an issue of occupational health and safety on the obligation of the employer, which could be ticking the boxes on having a checklist on the things that you have to look at, and then ask the employee to really like have that checklist. So there's a myriad of ways on how to do it. So if you're more interested on these, there's our publications are just on our website, www.ilonetwork.com. You can access them, but also we have access to trade unions, just 30 seconds, to trade unions where they have like the model clauses. Let's say South Africa is ready to come up with a regulation on telework. On our wiki, we have all the clauses on telework where we can have spectral access to non-members and see how to propose some of the amendments of the law, or even to propose a new regulation. All together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Okay, I'm unfortunately going to have to bring this to a close. We're going over time. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much to you for your participation. There are a number of other sessions where these issues are coming up. So hopefully we can take those discussions into there, and we can also have these discussions informally as we have lunch and the tea breaks and so on. Thank you very much. And a round of applause for our speakers. I'll call upon Dev and Kate, and then our second panelist is going to be available online. Unfortunately, Olumide could not make it here. So I'll call upon you, Dev and Kate, to come through.
Good day to everybody. I take this opportunity to say special greeting to your ladyship and your lordship from Sierra Leone, and to President of the Redundancy Board, Mr. Vassen. We have heard various panelists discussing about employment rights, and we have heard the director of ILAW talking about how we are working toward reinforcing employment rights, especially in relation to employees. At this panel, we'll be looking at two very main important aspects in relation to the fundamental right protected by the Human Rights Convention, and they are privacy and right at work. For this panel, we have two panelists, Mr. Olumide Babalola from Nigeria. He will be joining online. And then we have Kate Nderu from Kenya, who is not a lawyer, but an expert in human resources management. So in the course of this expose, we'll proceed by letting the panelists talk on their different items, and then there will be questions addressed to them by myself. Then we'll open the floor for direct question and answers, as opposed to question and answers which has been done previously. I hope this will be fine with everybody. May I just ask Olumide if he's available to start, please?
Yes, thank you very much.
Welcome, Olumide. So before he starts, I give a brief introduction of what he does.
Thank you.
Olumide is a lawyer from Nigeria. He actually is specialized and is an expert in digital right privacy and data protection there. He got huge qualification. He got a master's degree in international commercial with ICT and commerce from the UK. He's also doing a PhD on the concept of privacy with the jurisprudence of Nigerian court. Kate is from Kenya, so she got 10 years experience in human resources management. She's practicing there, and she specializes in human resources policy and compliance with labor law as her best practice. You may start, Olumide.
Thank you very much once again for the invitation. It's so I'm not so happy that I couldn't be in Mauritius physically. Last week we had a privacy conference in Nigeria, so I traveled to Nigeria, and on Friday I returned to the UK, thinking I would be, because I teach in the UK, so I thought I could be able to travel within the shortest time I had, but unfortunately I couldn't be there physically with you. But thank God we have technology, so we can take advantage of technology. Very quickly, I'm just going to speak to a few issues that bother my mind about privacy at work. Before COVID, maybe we were not so concerned. We were not so much concerned about privacy at work. Because I mean, employers could always see their employees and they could always set rules. But even at that, there were still privacy implications with an employee's work in the workplace. But I'm going to start first by even looking at Africa as a continent, disposition towards privacy before we come to the workplace. So the African Charter on Human and People's Rights is the international law, international treaty that speaks to fundamental rights in Africa. Unfortunately, this treaty does not make any provision for privacy. And that has led to arguments or submissions or conclusions that as Africans, we do not value privacy. Because if our most important law on fundamental rights does not make no mention of privacy in the African Charter. However, there are some subsequent documents of the African Union that speak to privacy. For example, the documents related to child's rights, and some subsequent maybe guidelines, maybe supplement. For example, the ECOWAS Supplementary Act makes provision for data protection and privacy. Now there is the Malabo Convention, which is yet to be enforceable, makes provision for data protection and privacy. But as it were, Africa still does not have an enforceable and formidable legal framework on the right to privacy. So that is why my perspective would not necessarily be a Pan-African perspective, but that of national municipal laws that speak to privacy. I know a whole lot of countries in Africa, well over 39, right now have documents that speak to data protection, and their constitutions would also speak to privacy. So let's bring it down to privacy at work. Now, the first contact we always have with issues related to privacy would be at the point of recruitment. An average business calls for application to fill vacancies. And it is really at that point that we begin to have issues related to privacy. First of all, When you call for these applications, what do you do with the applications afterwards? After sieving out the successful applicants, what happens to the CVs and the documents of the unsuccessful applicants? How do you manage these documents? How do you keep them afterwards? Who has access to them? Nigeria, for example, we've seen situations where you go to the roadside to buy food. Maybe we have what we call akara in Nigeria. And you see, they use someone's CV to package the food for you. Apparently, some companies collect CVs and they dispose them, whichever way. Or they collect CVs, they sieve out the ones they need, and the ones they don't need, sometimes they give them out, sometimes they... What happens to trashing them? But that is just one aspect of privacy that employers will now begin to face. What about storage, retention? How do you keep these CVs afterwards? How do you keep these applications afterwards? Most importantly, who has access to them? Are there internal controls? Because before now, we might not so much value such documents, but they are documents that now contain very, very personal and intimate information about prospective applicants, about current employees and future employees, or even people you will not employ at all, but to whom you owe a duty of care as far as privacy is concerned. I'll leave that aside. Please let me know the number of minutes I have so that I know how to articulate my thoughts. Then the second thing that always comes to the fore is, now that we have remote working, these are extremely sensitive issues that arise. The panel before us spoke about what constitutes workplace. Now the problem, the hazard in the workplace, but the problem is now more complex. You have a workplace. In the past, you had a workplace, people working from toilets to the kitchenettes to the car park. All those things ordinarily will constitute workplace. But now when we have people working from home, what constitutes workplace? If the person goes to the kitchen during working hours, is he still at workplace? If the person goes to get grocery, even within working hours, is it workplace? Now, with respect to privacy, I know some companies do it. Employees are meant to keep up their cameras while working. Some companies do it just to ensure that the employees are working. For some people, it is not as intense or intrusive. They want to ensure that you keep your computer active. It is not an intense, but it has privacy implications as well. For some people, in the workplace now, not even remote, you have cameras all over the place. They have privacy implications. Yes, the employer is interested in safeguarding his workplace. The employer is interested in ensuring that workers are actually working and earn their pays. The employer is interested in ensuring that his equipment are not damaged. But also, what about monitoring? The employer sometimes also wants to monitor the employees. There are case laws in Europe, most apparently. Africa's jurisprudence around that is not so developed, except for a few countries. I'll give credit to Kenya and South Africa. Their privacy jurisprudence is about the most robust in Africa. My PhD research thesis centers around the courtroom jurisprudence around privacy, and South Africa has done a lot. I give credit to them. Kenya has done a lot. I give credit to them. But with respect to monitoring employees, not so much has been said in Africa, even from the African courts, but from the European courts, yes. The position of the law with mounting cameras in the workplace is number one. There is a right to be informed. These are data protection rights. Every data subject has to be informed on how, when, the objectives, the purpose for processing data. So if you are going to be placing a camera on top of my head or around where I work, then I have to be informed. That is what the law says. Because even in the workplace, employees have reasonable expectation of privacy. So anything you do in the workplace that impacts privacy, the employee must be informed. And these things are practical. I'll give you an example of something that happened to a client in Nigeria. And it was afterwards that we all sat down and said, oh, so these things, you need to know how it works in the workplace and how practical it could be. They have a very big parking space. In the parking space, they mounted a camera. But there was no CCTV notice, which is a very, very important provision of data protection laws and privacy laws all over the world. If you must mount CCTV, then you must give privacy notice. You must give notice to a reasonable notice, conspicuous notice to anybody coming around that vicinity of the existence of CCTV cameras, one, who manages it, two, and the purpose. So the generic purpose is surveillance, for security, for public interest. Those are the generic purposes. But most importantly, people must be aware of it. Something embarrassing happened. So a woman came into the parking lot. There was no notice. And for women and men too, sometimes when you get out of the car, your clothes is rumpled, you want to readjust yourself. But this is a woman who was trying to adjust her underwear, and the camera was taking everything. Thank God the woman's nakedness was not exposed. But if there was CCTV notice, perhaps the woman might actually either stay in the car to adjust herself, or not even do it at all, or look away from where the camera was and do it. So these are actionable cases, because the woman can actually sue that company or that business for violation of privacy. The ones we've had in Europe between employers and employees, and this thing is creeping into Africa, but it is best that businesses take hold of it before it creeps on them. For example, in Nigeria, we never had cases where people would sue for publication of facts in a false light. These are things about privacy. If you publish stories about me in a false light, I am not even suing you for defamation. What everybody would normally do is defamation. But defamation has some strong ingredients that sometimes is difficult to prove. So in this case, I'm not saying you have defamed me. I'm not saying that statement is libelous. I'm not saying I have a character. I'm not saying I have a reputation to protect. But I'm saying as an individual, as a human, I have inherent right to privacy as a human. I don't need to be a politician. I don't need to be a popular person. I don't need to be a famous person. I don't need to be a rich man to be able to enforce my privacy. This thing goes to employees too. So there were privacy interests that have not been litigated in Africa, but the global consciousness around privacy is bringing it home. The same thing to employees and employers. Now, in Europe, the court specifically ruled that if employers must mount CCTV cameras to monitor employees, then there has to be notice. There has to be a legal basis. Legal basis can always be the employer's legitimate interest. That's a legal basis. But legitimate interest is not also at large. There are ingredients, there are factors, there are justifications before you can rely on legitimate interest to process. Now, where I'm going to stop on this.
Sorry, Olumide, you got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm also rounded. I'm time conscious. Thank you very much. Now, where I'm going to stop, draw the curtain is references, employees' references. Before now, it created its own peculiar kind of problems. Some employers would not even give references at all. Some employers will give and be vindictive. These are privacy impacting practices or privacy impacting responsibilities of employers. The law is that you must give references. That's one, that's the labor part of it. Now, the privacy part of it is because those references, they are personal data of the employer. Number one, of the employee. It must be accurate because that's one of the principles of data protection. So you can't say because the employee, you were not happy when the employee was leaving and you are not going to give references that do not specifically speak to the employee's personal information. I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olumide. Now we let Kate do her presentation, which is on whether employees also have rights in that issue of privacy. Yes, Kate.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. While the tech people support me to get my deck up, may I request you to stand up? I can see some people are falling asleep. I want to wake up those who are falling asleep. Stand up. May I request, indulge me, please. Please stand up. Make sure you have a little bit of space there. Yes, thank you. I'm an HR person, so this is why I have to indulge you. Yes. When I say sit, you stand. When I say stand, you sit. So basically, we're doing the opposite. Let's see how good people's memories are. Stand, sit, stand, 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 sit, 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 stand, 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 sit, sit. Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're all awake, so we start now. Kate. Good exercise. Good exercise. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. My name is Kate Nderu from Nairobi, Kenya. We run an HR firm called Knightwise Human Capital. We're talking about employee data rights, and I am a champion of this because of the nature of work that we do. We are in HR, we are the problematic people for the lawyers. We create all the problems because the lawyers believe everything. The law is very clear, but sometimes it's not. So this is a very treacherous ground on employee data rights. The GDPR is the backbone of everything data protection. It's heavily influencing all other policies around the world, and in Africa, in South Africa, the Protection of Personal Information Act. In Nigeria, the Data Protection Regulation, and the Data Protection Act in Kenya. I'm sorry, Mauritius, you are our host, but I didn't include you, so please don't chase me away from your island. I still want to enjoy it. In this context, the employer is the data processor, and the data subject is the employee. How do you qualify what is employee data? And some of it was brought out in Olumide's presentation. There's demographic information. What's your name? What's your age? What's your nationality? What's your ID number? What's your passport number? All that's demographic information, financial information that we need for business. What's your bank account number? We need to pay your salary. That's very personal information, but we still end up gathering it. Social security numbers, which is a form of identification in some countries. Biometric information. This is very, very thorny and a very gray area that we need to pay a lot of attention to. If you have thousands of employees and you need to manage time and attendance, you need the biometric information. Your security, if you're dealing in gold, for example, and the people who need to access the room where the gold is stored, the security needs to be at a higher level than just the biometric information. Banks, the access is limited by just scanning your iris so that you can access a room where the vault is. Medical information in some cases is needed. Are you allergic to anything that we need to know so that we don't give you the hazards that are around in the workplace are not contributing to a medical condition that then you will come and say that you did not provide occupational safety and health in our workplace. Some data risks that exist, and Olumide touched a little bit on this, but if you look at the employee life cycle from the point when they're being recruited to the time they exit, there are so many areas where data is collected. Olumide mentioned part of it. I will focus on what he didn't mention, but there is pre-recruitment during where you're sourcing for applications. He went into detail about that. I will not repeat. Recruitment, there's demographic information, and now the level of information is also equally advancing as long as the life cycle is improving and even more sensitive. So for example, when you hire someone, during the recruitment stage, potentially you didn't need information about their children. And this is now information to do with minors. But once they're hired, that information is relevant, but it's not relevant during the recruitment stage. During employment, where you need information to transact normal business, the category of information may also change or improve. During exits, some financial information as well. For example, in Kenya, the tax calendar is in June. So if someone exited in November, you'll still have their information until June of the next subsequent year when you send them their tax information for them to file the taxes. How do you safeguard employee data? Consent. Anything data, consent should be the word that you remember all the time. And the other key thing is if the use changes, then there should be a second level of consent. For example, in the CCTV surveillance that Olumide was talking about, you did notify me that this area is under CCTV surveillance, but then you wanted to use it in a disciplinary investigation. Did I consent to that change? So the consent is not just during the first point of interaction of the collection of the data, but as long as the use is changing, you also need to seek consent. What is the use that you're collecting this data for? Is it for recruitment? Is it for exit? Is it for processing your payroll? That use must be very, very clearly defined for the data subject to understand, why do you need my data? Purpose limitation. What are you using this data for? And if this changes, for example, I was a candidate in your job application, I am now your employee. So that use is not the same, and this needs to be updated to the data subject. The accuracy. Are you missing one digit of my identification number? That means I'm actually somebody who's entirely different. The accuracy of the data collected. Storage limitation. How long are you going to retain my data? Especially for the candidates that applied to you, how long did you tell them you're going to retain their information with you? When they exit, how long are you going to retain that data? And do you even need to do that? Transfer limitation, can you transfer this data to third parties? The trade unions have been up in arms saying we've not been involved. Why are we being considered as third parties? Yet we are we should be privy to this data that's being collected by the employer. Confidentiality, this is a human right at this point. There should be authorization to share any information that you've collected from a data subject. In conclusion, data privacy is now a human right. It's in the constitution of different countries. So we cannot turn a blind eye to this issue. We need to keep upgrading. Some of the laws, like Olumide said, in the African context are not very clear. We're still learning as we move along. So we have to be on our toes to make sure that whatever data we are coding to our employees is relevant to what the challenges exist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. I got two questions. I think both Olumide and Kate can address that very quickly, and then we'll leave the question for the floor. Kate, first, what are the protections at recruitment process which an employer need to observe?
This is in the last slide where it's about consent, the limitation of use, the reason. If this changes, you have to keep updating. So consent, consent, consent. With data protection, if you're in doubt, just think consent.
Say you got a person who came to an interview and that person was rejected, but has provided CV and all her detail, what the employer does with that if that person is not taken on board.
Okay, so the limitation of use. During the recruitment process, there should be clarification that this data is being collected for your candidacy for this job. Should you be unsuccessful, we will retain it for X period of time. That X period of time, most laws talk about reasonable. What's reasonable? It's a very vague word. So you have to relate it to whatever your business is and what you need it for. But normally, I think 1 year is a reasonable time frame because you may be unsuccessful at this time, but can we consider you again in a 3-month period, in a 6-month period? So whatever reasonable time frame, but in my own opinion, 1 year is a reasonable time frame.
On the same issue, when do you do that? You do that at the time when you actually launch your advertisement for the job, you put a clause, or how do you do that? Huh?
Yes, so it should. Okay. Yeah, so. Okay, thank you. Yeah, it should be a disclaimer in the job advertisement that any data collected during this process, and the lawyers in the room can add all the relevant words that will be helpful to protect an employer from any risk that this may pose.
Any comment on that, Olumide?
Yes, thank you very much, Kate. Kate has spoken from the human resources, HR perspective. Yes, I would always also like employers to also look at these things very well from the privacy legislation point of view, because I mean, the data protection laws, all have different provisions, but similar provisions around the world. So employers will want to rely on legitimate interest to keep some of these CVs or applications for reasonable time. That is what the law says. The law says reasonable time. So sometimes you want to look at the industry. Sometimes you want to look at the kind of practice that just like Kate said, keeping somebody's CV for 5-6 years, I don't think it's reasonable because the person's qualification would have even changed from that time. So maybe 1 year, just like she said, should just be a reasonable time to keep. But importantly, companies must keep policies that speak to these things. Retention policies, they are very important policies to be kept that speak to the number of period you want to keep this document. And most importantly, justification for why you are keeping them for that long. Does the law provide for it? Is it industry practice? Is it standard practice? Is it international best practice? What exactly is the justification for you to keep people's CVs or application documents for longer than it is necessary?
Thank you, Olumide.
Next question is, when can an employee object to the use of CCTV in his disciplinary committee? This is a question which deals with legal and HR. So who want to address that first? Okay.
I think an employee can contest the use of CCTV footage in a disciplinary committee if the consent that the CCTV footage collected or used was for disciplinary purposes. And normally it is not. If you just see that this premises is under 24-hour surveillance. Some even get creative and say Big Brother is watching. Does that really tell me that you're going to use this CCTV footage for my disciplinary? But this can be improved in your policy, as Olumide is saying, the contracts, there need to be a clause in the data protection clause in the employment contracts that data collected during your tenure, during your work can be used for any business processes. And now a disciplinary becomes a business process. So this is how I think someone could ring fence to bring the CCTV use in a disciplinary within the employment relationship.
Thank you, Kate. Olumide?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, everybody also needs to know that data protection laws or privacy laws, they have exceptions. They have obligations. They have, derogations. So if you collect CCTV footage in an hidden manner or in a secret manner, one might object to it because it violates privacy. But if you have policies that speak to it, just like Kate said, that, okay, we would use it maybe for security purposes, for surveillance, for business purposes, for legitimate interest, yes, you might be able to use it. But if it is going to be used in such a way that infringes somebody's right to privacy, the person can validly, like there are cases in Europe where even the employee was caught stealing, but because those CCTV cameras were planted secretly, and the court conducted a balancing of interest act. So the court looked at the interest of privacy against the interest of the employer, and the court weighed it in favor of privacy. So there are cases where, yes, people can object, and even such footages would not be used. So there has to be transparency. Transparency is one of the principles of data protection. There has to be transparency. If you are putting cameras, then you need to inform people. So it's not just for your own benefit, it's also for their own benefit as well, because they also have a right to privacy, and this is a fundamental right which is protected all over the world. So yes, they can actually object to it if it was not done in according to the law.
Thank you. Let's go to a practical example. You are in this disciplinary committee room where there is a CCTV, and that is in the policy of the company. Disciplinary committee has started. The employee has given consent for that. And at some point, the DC become self-implication, whereby there are things, if the employee will say that will be incriminating. What do we do? Are you there?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know that was for me.
You hear me?
So, oh, sir, thank you. So, I mean, once you start using CCTV and someone has consented to it, and it becomes, you said it becomes self-incriminating for the disciplinary committee. Yes, I mean, I really don't expect the CCTV footage to be stopped. So the whole idea of CCTV footage is for, at the inception, for whoever is using it to state. That is why it is very important to state why are we using it. So if we say we are using it for the purpose of gathering evidence, and we are gathering evidence and one person does not find the evidence favorable, that is not enough reason to truncate the process, because another person might find it reasonable, and it is also part of the entire process, the entire procedure of fact-finding, of justice delivery in some cases, of the business processes also for the company as well. So yes, of course, the company is not meant And that's the whole idea of the public interest and justice around this thing. The company is not meant to use the CCTV to the detriment, so to speak, of the employee. Because in that case, that means CCTV is now being used as an instrument to either victimize the employee or to punish them or to intimidate the employee. It is supposed to use for business processes, and both employer and employee will take advantage of it. So if in the hearing, evidence is, even under some laws, tampering with evidence is even a crime. So
yes, but hang on a minute. Yes, but if we heard Kate said, disciplinary committee is part of the business process of the company.
Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, what do we do if the matter becomes self-incriminating to the employee?
To the employer or the employee?
The employee.
Okay, to the employee. No. So it is part of evidence gathering, whether it is implicating or not. The business wants to protect itself. So it is not a problem. Once, except at a point the employee withdraws consent. And even if you withdraw consent, consent is not the only ground. There is legitimate interest, there is legal obligation, there is even the public interest part, because the public is interested in security of lives and properties. So at that point, there is nothing the employee can do anymore, even if the employee does not consent. If the employer can find other legal grounds like public interest and legitimate interest to use the CCTV camera, there is nothing the employee can do in that case, because everything does not start and stop with consent. For example, processing an employee's personal data in the company, sending the employee's tax returns or tax obligations or tax information to the tax authorities. The employee does not need to give consent for that, because those are fixed by law. So there are duties fixed by law that you don't need the employee's consent, and this is one of them.
Good, we get the point. Any comment on that, Kate? Okay. To whom? There's a question for you, Olumide. Just bear with me. Kate will read the question.
A question to you, Olumide, from the chat, Miss Miriam Tapela. Hi, Olumide. When you say the employee has a right to be given a reference, is this right emanating from the data protection rights of an employee? I'm asking because our employment law in Botswana only requires that an employer gives the employee a certificate of employment indicating the duration of service and the position held, nothing more.
Thank you, Miriam. I see that the Data Protection Act of Botswana came into operation in 2021, circa 2022. So employers must now understand that there are now many levels of obligation on the employers. The employment law is one, privacy and data protection laws are another. Under the privacy and data protection laws of most countries, there are rights that data subjects like employees can exercise. And right to information is one of them. Data subjects access rights is another. So these are information that these are rights that the employees can activate to access information about himself and to request. There's another one called data portability. That's a principle actually, and it's also a right. So employees can request that his information with your company be sent to another company. So this right emanates, or this right is enforceable under Data Protection Act, even the Botswana Data Protection Act. So it is not necessarily under the employment law. So an employee can exercise such a right and request for reference, and such has to be complied with. Not only this information under the employment law, any other information that the new employer requests, it is the employee's right that the old employer must provide. So yes, the rights computable under data protection.
Thank you, Olumide. A question for Kate. Is verbally informing employees of them being recorded sufficient, or is it compulsory to be in writing? Kate?
I think all the lawyers I've interacted with have always told me if it's not written, the lawyers in the house, if it's not written, it didn't happen. So it's recommendable that you document this in writing.
See, there are many questions on chat, but I will take only one because I have to leave a question for the floor as well. Can a company install hidden camera? I think this is quite obvious.
Olumide, I think this is your passion area, so please.
I think we said it earlier. As much as it is desirable for an employer to want to catch the employee in the act, the employee is a human. And every human, by virtue of your humanity, you have inherent fundamental rights. The law does not allow anywhere in the world, because privacy is even an internationally recognized fundamental right. The law does not allow the employer to play that kind of prank, so to speak, on employees. If you are looking for thieves, if you are looking for people pilfering or people, anything, they have to, because they also have rights. And where your own right stops is where theirs starts. So they must be informed. There are cases in Europe where the employer has been fined seriously for planting hidden cameras. And even the evidence recovered, the evidence elicited from such hidden cameras were not admissible in court because they were gotten illegally and they violated right to privacy. So no, the answer is no.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I know we are nearing to lunch and you're all hungry. We open the floor for questions. If you have any, please. Yes, the lady raised her hand first. Yes. Say to whom you are addressing the question and from which country and company you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Olumide. My name is Georgina Gallo, Airtel Africa. My question is in relation to data transfer across jurisdictions. As companies are using technology to enhance efficiency, we find ourselves using apps or even just contracting vendors in terms of global payroll and also with respect to also global recruitment. Some of these entities have either the servers, either in Europe, even some of them are in South Africa, and then we've got entities across Africa. How do we deal with that transfer of data and also processing across the jurisdictions in compliance with data protection laws?
Okay, I will take that. And Georgina, I think you're also from Kenya. And we actually had a problem with a company that wanted to do business in Kenya, but because they wanted to have the data stored in servers where Kenya didn't have jurisdiction, it brought out a whole issue. So GDPR is the governing framework in this, or guiding framework. And when you're entering into these contracts, always make sure that you can have access to that data, that it is not stored in a server somewhere where you cannot have jurisdiction. I'm not a lawyer. I would like to put that caveat. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that in those agreements, you can always specify that this data must be stored in local servers within Kenya's jurisdiction. I'll see you on the sidebar because I don't want to publicize this particular company, but there is actually a case where a company lost a contract simply because of a jurisdiction of data issue.
Next question to you.
Good afternoon. The name is Mamurena Madisha from South Africa, South African Municipal Workers Union. The data privacy and employees having rights to, I think it's starting to become a perception of power. So first question, and the question is directed to both the speakers. So employee A is moving to employer B. right? And in the process of background check, employer A then discloses that, by the way, this employee has been charged previously, or they are currently about to undergo disciplinary process. Does that particular employer need the consent of the employee to share that information with the potential new employee, a new employer? And the second question, and the previous speaker almost touched on it, with the new social media trends that we are also now trying to use for work purposes and WhatsApp groups in particular, does an employer have a leg to stand on to say, you were tarnishing my reputation on your WhatsApp group with whoever for this particular issue? Does an employer have a leg to stand on there? I mean, it's my private phone. And of course, in our policy, there is no WhatsApp usage as a tool of communication. Thank you.
Okay, I will tackle your first question and Olumide can tackle the second one. In terms of consent during a background check, yes, that must be given. If it's only an investigation that has not led to a prosecution and a ruling against the employee, then that can be left at the good judgment of the employer A. However, when there has been a judicial process, then this becomes public record. When it's public record, then you cannot be held accountable for disclosing this information. So consent must be given. And during that recruitment process, you actually ask the candidates, do you consent to us to executing background checks? And you can even put your limitations or leave it open. When you don't leave it open, that covers everything from your salary information, any criminal or any disciplinary issues. Olumide?
Yes, if we have time, I quickly want to touch the previous, I mean, just a few, if time permits me. Now, the previous speaker, the person who asked the question said something about cross-border. We need to understand that cross-border transfer of data is a huge problem, even globally. Globally, everybody's still struggling with it. First of all, what constitutes cross-border? Storage, yes, we understand storage in foreign, and Kate said something about local servers. That's like data localization. Data localization brings its own set of problems as well. And sometimes it is not so realistic to say all servers. As we speak now, you are in Mauritius, we are using Zoom. This is cross-border transfer, whatever, from whatever angle you want to call it. Now, the organizers of this conference cannot even control, because where is Zoom's server? Zoom might not even have one server. They might have more than 3, 4, 5 servers located in multi-jurisdictions. So it's a big problem. But again, policies can solve it. We have what we call binding corporate rules, can solve it. Transfer agreement can solve it. Some contractual terms can also speak to it, so that you know you are doing something around it. You might not be able to control it entirely, but at least there are policies that protect you. Now, talking about WhatsApp, again, we talk about privacy. If it's a private, you can't control everything about an employee's life. You cannot. It's not possible, because the employee has a life too. Working for you does not mean the employee has to abandon his or her life and everything has to do with you and with you. Yes, there are companies who have strong policies with respect to when you're speaking at events, don't represent the company, or because you are the face of the company, you can't speak at certain events. But these things ought to be reasonable, and they ought to be regulated. Again, consent, agreement, understanding, policies must speak to it. But if it is a private WhatsApp message, WhatsApp group, I don't think a company can reasonably regulate that. You can't gag your employees, because that will not even only speak to privacy. It will begin to speak to freedom of expression. It will begin to speak to freedom of association. Except those WhatsApp group, you have put the employee there to represent the company. Then you can now regulate what the employee is going to say on those. But if they are private WhatsApp groups,
okay,
and also the jurisprudence around WhatsApp groups, it's also growing. Are they private places? Are they public places? But of course, policies, I would always amount policies. They are quite important for this.
thank you, Olumide. I think the gentleman over there has got a question. Then we'll go to the lady over there. And the lady there also asks a question. Then next time. Okay, yes, please.
My name is Davis Ndobiso Spanda from Zimbabwe. My question relates to the new kid on the block, which is emerging in 2023. That is the use of work monitoring software, which is installed on employer-owned computers. How far does the worker stay within the law when he's working from home? And at certain times, the employee might have to do certain personal things, taking advantage of the employer's laptop, which has faster speed and other things, for example, children's homework, wedding plans, and the other things. And the employer sees all those activities, including other private work the employee does in the evening, using the same computer for other financial interests and the like. How far can the employee remain safe, given that the latest software can actually walk into the real activity that the employee is actually doing at a particular time? Thank you.
Thank you. I spoke to this earlier. It's a very dangerous path for employers. It is necessary for some of their businesses, but it's a very dangerous one, because drawing the line is a problem. And these softwares, they are intrusive. They are intrusive technologies. The very first rule is employees must be informed, and not just informed. They must be comprehensively informed of the capacities of these softwares, so that the employees know already. With such, you are already intruding into the employee's home, into the employee's family, into the employee's, because even while you're at work, we all know that even while you are working from home, there is no, you can't be 100% 24 hours during the period of employment. I mean, working hours, be alone. If you are working from home, your children might come, your spouse may come. So there would always be and even when you are working in the workplace, there are times you take personal calls, but the employer cannot be monitoring all these things, all in the name of ensuring that you are working. It's a very dangerous place to be. And this scenario that you even painted is a violation. Even if you want to make an excuse that, oh, she did it during working hours. Working hours, people have breaks. Working hours, people, you can't say while somebody is working, the person cannot do anything personal at all. But most importantly, there must be adequate information. And again, there are policies that will tie around it. But where it becomes unreasonable, that is where the employer might suffer, might bear liabilities if the cases should get to court. Because if it becomes unreasonable for you to say you are monitoring right from the minute that somebody is starting work up till the closing time, you are monitoring, it becomes a problem. But again, there has to be, every fact must be weighed along its own merits, but it's a very dangerous path to work for employers.
Okay, thank you. Levna?
Good afternoon. My name is Faith Chabet. I work with ENS Africa in Kenya. Thank you for the very useful discussion. I wanted to make a clarification about data localization in Kenya. I think Georgina asked a question around transfer of data across different jurisdictions, and there's an allusion to an entity that might have been unable to set up in Kenya or transfer data outside of Kenya. The country actually does not have data localization requirements, and it is possible to transfer data outside of the jurisdiction. The only requirement is that you need to demonstrate to the Data Protection Office that there are sufficient safeguards in whatever other jurisdiction to protect that data. So it is actually possible to transfer data or store data outside of the jurisdiction in Kenya. I just thought to make that clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Levna, no? No question? Okay. That the lady in front of, in the third row.
Thank you.
Yes. You wanted to ask question previously, you're not able, you're getting a chance.
Okay, thank you very much. Kagwe Robina from Uganda. Kate from Kenya, you talked about the trade unions being third parties, and I wanted a little bit of clarification. Are they completely not allowed to get information unless there's consent? Because in Uganda, we have our data, the Privacy and Data Protection Act of 2019, but the trade unions are exempted. They are free to get the information relating to their trade union work. For example, financial information, they don't need consent. They're supposed to get that because when you're looking at the principles, for example, of negotiating or collective bargaining, there's a duty to bargain in good faith. And now, if you are to bargain in good faith and I can't easily access, for example, the financial information, the payrolls of the employees that I'm representing as a trade union, then it becomes a little bit unfair to the trade union representing those workers. And also most likely the employer can use it as a tool to continue denying information and saying, oh, we are making losses, we are doing this and that. And you can't even access the financial records. So I just wanted that clarification.
Okay.
So Uganda is an outlier country in terms of involving the unions, but most of the other data protection laws or frameworks that exist in other African countries have not involved the union. So if you look at like payroll information, that's very personal. And the employee has to give consent because we understand there's that link that you need to know the pay so that you know your fees. But then are you going to collect data primarily that is related to your union, to your members, the membership signups? And what level of information sharing do you need the employer? And this can be done with the consent of the employee to say that, yes, you can share this information with the union. I give consent that you can share this information with the union. So I think Uganda is an outlier. I've not seen so many countries doing that.
Mr. Satya is from a trade union, so we take his question. Then we get only two quick questions for short answers, Cosimo and Levna.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. One quick observation and then the question. You can have the best of laws, the application of the law, which is important. And what recourse do you have in case there's no, the law is not being applied in a fair and just manner? Now, this being said, I've got two questions. With respect to recruitment and promotion, I just want to put a question. There was a debate at a point in time when recruitment is being done that the interview should be recorded. In case there is any sort of appeal, then this can be used as evidence in institution of appeal. Now, how would you react to this? Whether this is, of course, managed, the people who are doing the recruitment process, they can use this information for other purposes. So we have to ensure that information is being used only for that particular purpose of appeal. Secondly, now use of telephone, use of your personal telephone. at times for official purpose. You know what is being done? Instead of providing you with a telephone for official purpose, you're using your own personal telephone and being given an allowance. Now, if tomorrow there is the same situation for a laptop, you can be used for official purpose, then you are being paid an allowance. Now, in case there is any complaint tomorrow, of course, the police would confiscate your equipment, whether laptop or telephone, and they would have access to your personal information. I think these are issues that have got to be sorted out. And lastly, I would say that, as I said earlier on, the application of the law, even the issue of work from home, because you'll hear me maybe afterwards, there are some challenges that we are facing in Mauritius as regards workers. I did not want to react this morning, but I just want to share this with you. Thank you very much.
Very, very quick answers, please. And also for the two questions, very quick question.
Okay, I'll speak to the interview recording. I think this mainly relates to public service, where people are being interviewed to hold public positions. So again, the consent has to be sought from the applicant that you're okay, that this is going to be recorded and will be public record. They have to consent to that. In the private sector, it's not so much. And if we're using this technology, there is always the disclaimer. Even I had it this morning that recording in progress. This meeting is being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please exit the meeting. And even the information they send before, they tell you this meeting will be recorded. Do you consent to be in the recording? So consent. But for public recruitment, I think this is about public and fair practice in the recruitment. The candidates have to be informed and consent to this.
That addresses every question.
Okay, I quickly want to say
very quickly, Olumide.
Very quickly. Yes, I think Kate is so big on consent, but I am not always very comfortable with that in a workplace. You know why? Consent is a very tricky thing. I'm not always, as a lawyer, I'm speaking as the lawyer. I mean, she's speaking as an HR specialist, but because the problem with consent is very tricky. Consent can be given today and taken back tomorrow, or given this morning and taken and withdrawn in the evening. So what happens with subsequent processing of data? What happens to what you've done earlier? What I would always advise is companies should find a way to identify another legal basis outside consent. Maybe the contract of employment. Maybe you can tie some of these things to the contract of employment such that if you don't process the data, the employment cannot go on. Or you can tie it to public interest, or you can tie it to legal obligation of the employer. That one, it puts your mind at rest. But if
okay, we know the problem with consent, giving consent, no problem. That is recorded. Yes, Lavna?
Yes, I'm Lavna from Davy Raya Chambers, Mauritius. My question is, we bearing in mind that the negotiations between an employer and an employee is not at arm's length. We've heard about having employees signing consent forms, giving their consent, adhering to policies, signing contracts where there are clauses that will invade their privacy. I mean, to what extent can an employer do that so that the employee would curtail and reduce its data rights? When will it be legal? And when can the court interfere and say, yes, you've given your consent, but this is not a free consent that you've given?
Very, very quick answer. I think it is for Olumide or Kate.
Olumide, do you want to have a go at it?
Please do.
I'm offering you the.
Okay, you want me to? Okay, I think she spoke about yes, consent. That's why initially I was speaking about consent. So that's a tricky thing with consent. For one, I sometimes always run away from consent, except I can't find any other ground because yes, between them now there are even jurisdictions around the world say that because of the imbalance in bargaining power between employers, there's a decision. If you send me an email afterwards, I'll share the decision with you, European decision, because of the imbalance of bargaining powers between employers and employees. That's why I said I always advise clients to as much as possible, avoid consent. An employee can always give consent. A prospective employee can always give consent if he wants job. If he's in the job, he wants to retain the job, can give consent. If he is looking for favor, can give consent. But this consent is not really valid in the eyes of the law because it might be under undue influence, it might be under duress, it might be involuntary, so to speak. So if you can find other reasons, that's why I said in contract of employment, make it a term that for this contract of employment to succeed, for it to be subsisting, for us to be able to provide all our obligations, we must process your data. And you might want to list the data, but it is not even, it is not a closed list of personal data that would be processed. So I would always advise to look for other grounds rather than consent. It's very tricky. It can be taken back. It can
We got that. We got that. Last question for, please.
Thank you, Dev. I'll convert my question to a comment, just in the interest of time. Kozima Wetende, Kaplan and Stratton, Lex Africa from Nairobi, Kenya. My comment is really about these pieces of legislation that are progressive and are coming in and so on. I'm just looking at it in terms of balancing the rights and duties of both parties to that relationship. I think I would say the same should apply in terms of the application of the Data Protection Act, because to take an approach where everything perhaps focuses more on the employee or more on the employer could end up creating an imbalanced relationship and an unhealthy employment relationship. I think I'll leave it at that and pick up on the plenary session.
Thank you, Cosimo. Thank you. So thank you very much, Olumide and Kate. I'm sorry you have gone out of time. I'll say bon appetit to you. Just one second. There is a book which has been actually authored by the president of the Redundancy Board. If anybody is interested, it is at the desk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much.